Good afternoon, everyone. We're gonna get started. If people would take their seats, that would be great. I'd like to welcome you to the first of 5 public hearings on the New York State Foundation formula. My name is Anita Murphy. I retired last year as the district superintendent at Capital Region BOCES, or Board of Cooperative Educational Services. Prior to that, I was a superintendent of schools and had lots of jobs all over the state during my career. I am joined today by the president of the Rockefeller Institute, Mr. Robert Magna, Dr. Lisa Parshall, who is a professor of political science at Damon University and a Rockefeller Institute fellow, Dr. Lucy Sorensen, who's an associate professor of public administration at the University of Albany, public administration and policy. My apologies. Just as a reminder, the hearing is being conducted after the hearing. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted online. Some of the audience members may be recognizable in the footage. By remaining in the audience, you are giving consent to the possibility of being in the background of that recording. And then, although we do not have simultaneous interpretation services on site today, we do have an ASL interpreter who will be providing services to the right on the stage. So the live stream won't have it. If you have any questions about the Foundation Aid study or about this hearing, or if you need assistance with anything today, please talk to one of our current staff members. They're out in the hall, they're in the back, they're down the sides. Please just let us know and we're happy to help in any way. And before we begin, I'm going to ask that everybody silence your phones. It is very important. The panel really is here to listen today from 2 o'clock until 4:30 to testimony. That testimony will be 6 minutes. And then we will allow for about a minute if there are clarifying questions from panel members. If there's real clarifications that they need, they will email you or set up a phone call. And we appreciate that we're trying to stick to a timeline so that we can close the auditorium at 4:30 and start again with the public at 5:30. I think most importantly right now, on behalf of the Rockefeller Institute, we would like to express absolute sincere thanks to Principal Darrell Bank and the High School of Fashion Industries who welcomed us here today. They've gone through walkthroughs and have done amazing work to allow us to be here in New York City. So thank you, Darrell. Thank you. And I would also like to thank folks members of the audience and our invited speakers for being here. We know this is a very important work that the Rockefeller Institute is going to do. Just a little background and context. The purpose today is not for the panel to speak, but to hear voices from the field on the Foundation Aid formula in state education funding. As you all know, I'm sure, the budget this year, the 24-25 budget, called for the Rockefeller Institute to conduct a study to assess the state's Foundation Aid formula, funding and formula, and discuss political or potential modifications to how the formula works. We all know that it's complex, and so they're here to listen to what you all have to say. And as a part of the study, the researchers at the Rockefeller Institute are collecting feedback from the public education stakeholders, both through online submission, written comment, and through in-person verbal testimony. So please feel free, even if you provide testimony or don't get a chance to provide testimony, to provide written testimony that is available to you. This is the first of 5 public hearings across the state, and feedback from both portions of the hearings will be incorporated into the foundation aid formula study and will be used to inform the final report and findings that Rockefeller will present. Bob will go through the timeline with you, but hopefully in early December 24. And now I am pleased to turn this over to Bob, who will provide some introductory remarks. Bob?
My name is Bob Megna, President of the Rockefeller Institute of Government. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first of 5 public hearings on the foundation aid formula. The purpose of this hearing is to hear directly from experts in the pre-K through grade 12 education space, but also from others and the interested public who have a focus on this vital part of state and local government. There is perhaps no more important role for a state than the education of its citizens. In fact, the state constitution in New York enshrines that right for all New Yorkers. Most of us know that the development and implementation of the foundation aid formula was a long process with many ups and downs along the way. It is the job of the Commission to revisit the formula, to look for ways to improve how it functions in delivering aid to our 700-plus school districts in New York. Too many, including me, do not understand how all of the aspects of the formula intersect to create aid for districts. It is often opaque and difficult to understand. In other ways, the formulation is also very out of date, using data from early in the current century. We are tasked with making recommendations to update and address issues with how the formula functions and how it can be improved and made more transparent. At the end of this process, after the public hearings and after talking with as many interested parties as possible, we will produce a report that will hopefully provide reasonable options for improving the way the formula functions. Again, we're here to hear from folks, so I'm trying to keep my comments to a minimum so we can get started hearing from folks. But maybe quickly, I'd like to show you how we expect the hearings to go. Again, today is the first of 5. We'll be going to Reynolds, New York, which is outside of Cooperstown and is a relatively small rural district. We'll be going to Farmingdale on Long Island, to Buffalo, and to Albany. Guilderland is at the top, which is Albany, really. So, again, I know a lot of folks thought we should do, or maybe do, additional public hearings. I think the time frame we've been given by the governor and the legislature really makes it very difficult to do more public hearings. But as Anita said, and as we've been telling people all along, we are open to input from everyone in the process who has an interest in this important area, and we will set aside time to make sure we're hearing everyone's point of view. But what is it we're actually looking to work on? Well, this is a summary of the foundation aid formula. It's not even the full formula. I don't know that we would want to put that up in one space because I think it might give people indigestion or something, but it is a very complex, comprehensive formula with many pieces and interacting parts. Hopefully, we can figure out ways to both update it and improve it to be consistent with the intent of the foundation formula, which is to provide a sound basic education for every student in New York. So again, I don't really want to be up here talking. We want to hear from you. So I think if Lisa and Lucy just introduce themselves so people know who they are, we can get started.
Hello, I'm Lisa Parshall. I am a professor of political science at Damon University, which is right outside of Buffalo, New York.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lucy Sorensen. I'm an associate professor at the University at Albany, State University of New York, and looking forward to being here.
Anita?
Okay, I'm going to try to keep people on time, and so I will be calling speakers up. You will come to the podium, and you will see a clock, which will tell you how much time you have left. I will also give you a 1-minute sign when it's time. Again, 6 minutes. I will ask for if the panel has anything that they would like to clarify. We will thank you, and then we will go to the next person to provide testimony. Please stay in your allotted time frame. We're trying to make sure that we stay on schedule so that members of the public have their opportunity also to speak to the panel tonight. Thank you. So I am going to call Mike Sill. Mike is the Assistant Secretary of the United Federation of Teachers. Mike.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Sill, and I'm the Assistant Secretary of the United Federation of Teachers. On behalf of the union's over 190,000 members, I'd like to thank the Rockefeller Institute of Government for holding today's hearing on such a critically important topic. In 2007, the foundation aid formula was created to ensure that New York State was meeting its constitutional obligation to provide all students with a sound basic education, one that provides students with strong academics, social emotional learning, small class sizes, and robust academic intervention services. However, it's now 2024 and the outdated formula is failing to provide the children of New York City with the education they deserve. In the years since 2007, New York City's population has shifted and changed, the pedagogy and curricula we use to educate students has changed, and the cost of educating a child has changed as well. We need an updated foundation aid formula that reflects these changes so that every public school has the resources it needs to support all students in 2024 and beyond. We have 6 recommendations to that end. First, we must amend the methodology used to determine the base cost of education per pupil. Currently, as you know, the formula relies on the successful schools model to determine the base cost. This model takes the average per pupil spending from a smattering of districts that were deemed successful due to arbitrary proficiency rates. There are several flaws with this model, the most glaring of which is that the set of successful schools being used today has not been updated since 2012. The base cost is the building block of the entire education aid formula. It is the starting point for the determining that what each district will receive, and as it stands, we are starting from a place of inadequacy. Second, it is imperative that the foundation aid formula allocate funding based on specific student needs. In New York City, we have a particularly high number of students living in foster care and temporary housing. Since the spring of 2022, New York City has seen a sharp uptick in asylum seekers, many of whom are children in our schools. These children are living in temporary shelters out of which they're evicted after only 60 days. This level of uncertainty at home affects students greatly, and they require additional support services when they enter the classroom. The foundation aid formula must provide for these additional support services. The majority of these students are also English language learners who enter our schools in the middle of the year with little to no English proficiency, and therefore we need to provide these children with the appropriate services. In order to provide these children with the appropriate services, we need a growth aid formula to address mid-year changes in enrollment. Third, the funding formula must differentiate between the types of students with disabilities that we serve in our schools. The foundation aid formula has one weight for all students with disabilities, despite the fact that not all disabilities are the same. Students with physical disabilities versus intellectual disabilities require very different interventions throughout the school day, and the funding formula should recognize this. There should also be tiered weights for students with, that require different levels of service and differentiated levels of restriction as dictated by their IEP. We should also have post-IEP transitional weights in the formula. Fourth, additional weights for students requiring English as a new language, related service, or social emotional learning services must be accompanied by a lockbox. We've been asking for this for years, lockbox to make certain that those funds that are given for that purpose are not diverted to other ends. To ensure that our students are treated equitably, it's imperative that this additional funding go directly to the students that need it. Fifth, sufficient funding for the implementation of New York City's class size law should be baked into the foundation aid formula. Based on the passage of the class size law, it's clear that Governor Hochul and the legislature understand the value and importance of small class sizes and recognize them as a priority. However, the formula does not currently provide for capital expenditures, despite them forming part of a sound basic education. As New York City complies with the class size law, we'll need a consistent stream of funding each year, one that can be and classroom space. Sixth, and finally, the regional cost index is another aspect of foundation aid formula that is overdue for a refresh. The RCI is intended to account for varying labor costs across 9 different regions in New York. However, it has not been updated since 2006, despite rising costs of labor. As New York City residents know, living in our city is exceptionally expensive. NYSED has acknowledged this as well. For instance, we have the highest regional cost factor in the state to offset the city's high labor costs for school construction, and NYSED when NYSED was appropriating COVID recovery grants, New York City was the only district eligible to receive over $5 million for learning loss and mental health recovery. New York City often requires its own calculus, and the RCI needs to acknowledge this. So to wrap, the foundation aid formula must account for the students that are in our schools today, not the students that were in our schools 20 years ago. Until the formula does this, we cannot say that New York State has provided its students with an adequate and equitable, sound, basic education. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Does
Mike.
the committee have any clarifying questions? Thank you so
Thank
much.
I'm good. Thank you, Mike.
Senator Senator Robert Jackson is a New York State Senator for the 31st District.
Good afternoon, everyone. To the panelists, good afternoon, and everyone. I'm State Senator Robert Jackson, representing the 31st Senatorial District of Northern Manhattan and parts of the Northwest Bronx. Only about 339,000 constituents. But with community school districts, District 6 in Northern Manhattan and community school districts 9 and 10 in the Bronx. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on the topic that has been part of my life's work. Today marked the first day of gathering input that would ultimately inform the report to the governor and the state legislature, and as such, might find it unusual that a member of the state legislature is standing before you in this hearing. Last legislative session, I introduced legislation that championed at least $1 million in fiscal year 2025 budget to commission a comprehensive study to update the foundation aid formula. And today's meeting, facilitated by the Rockefeller Institute, results from the legislature's commitment to support the crucial changes. An inclusive public process incorporating all relevant stakeholders, traditionally marginalized voices, is essential in informing changes to the foundation aid formula. And this updated formula must ensure equitable and sufficient funding for every school in New York State so our children can obtain a sound basic education. Public education is a tool that uplifts all people, and I know that for myself. And it's a right that every child in this state has. And as a parent, education advocate, and lead plaintiff in the campaign for fiscal equity with Michael Rebell sitting over there, the lawsuit, I have dedicated my life to fighting for this right. The foundation aid born from the legislature's response to the New York Court of Appeals decision in CFE versus the state of New York has been crucial in providing essential funding to local school districts. Implemented in fiscal year 2007-2008 budget, the formula consolidated 30 existing aid programs into a single flexible operating aid formula based on actual district expenditures and student needs. It was designed to ensure that every child in New York State receives the quality education they deserve, no matter where they live. The Foundation Aid formula was a significant achievement designed to address funding inequities in our school districts. However, it is now 17 years old and requires comprehensive updates to reflect current poverty and student need data, changing educational requirements, learning standards, teaching practices, and evolving student demographics, especially in light of the profound disruption caused by the pandemic. Decades of delay and insufficient funding, combined with the aging of a formula itself, has caused irreparable harm to our schools, communities. And many districts were left underfunded for years, exacerbating pre-existing issues and severely hampering student access to an equitable and excellent education. Persistently starved districts have spiraled further, entrenching conditions that impede student success. And communities have fallen deeper into crisis, perpetuating cycles of poverty and burdening a new generation with unresolved educational inequities. And while the Foundation Aid formula was finally fully funded, the goalposts have moved forward, further away. The formula, once a cornerstone of equitable education funding, is now outdated and must be revised to meet the current educational needs and demographics. And we must update the formula to ensure its effectiveness addresses the contemporary challenges of our school districts that they face. Additionally, the formula must keep pace with rising inflation to ensure school districts receive the necessary funding to provide every student with a sound basic education. And recent changes to the calculation of inflation and information in the formula, though seeming slight, has resulted in reduced funding for school districts, particularly in New York City, compared to previous years. The updated Foundation Aid formula used data from the most recent census. They must use it from the most recent census. And currently, it relies on a 24-year-old census data from the year 20,000. And I have proposed in legislation S5451 that Education Funding Census Update Act to ensure that the most recent census data is used to calculate the state education aid. However, to address real-time needs not captured by census numbers, factors such as high concentration of newly arrived immigrants, unaccounted homelessness and displacement, the opioid crisis, mental health issues, foster care, overcrowded housing, single parenting, food insecurity, neighborhood crime, shuttered businesses, and special learning needs must be considered. This revision is necessary to address needs across educational spectrums, including qualified personnel, teachers, principals, nurses, social workers, counselors, aides, psychologists, behavioral specialists, and family liaisons, appropriate class size, physical and health education, tutoring after-school programs, summer schools, early intervention, early childhood education, support for monolingual learners, special education, community schools, and school infrastructures and conditions such as ventilation and heat. It's 90-something degrees out today. So we must equip our youth with the necessary resources and opportunities to flourish. And failing to do so not only shortchanges our children, but also undermines the future prosperity of our entire state. The stakes are high. Our children depend on our state's progress to depend on. And as a special nod to Michael Rebell, Michael, we thank you as the attorney that litigated and won the campaign for fiscal equity. Panel, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come in front of you. I look forward to working with you and listening to your report whenever it comes out. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Senator.
We are going to move to Krista Olson, the New York City Deputy Comptroller for the budget.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Krista Olson, the Deputy Controller for Budget in the Office of the New York City Comptroller, Brad Lander. Thank you to the Rockefeller Institute for taking the time to review the state's foundation aid formula and for giving me the opportunity to speak today on how to more equitably support our public school students. At $9.9 billion, foundation aid is the largest source of state funding for the New York City Department of Education. And yet, the Comptroller's Office estimates that state funding will represent just 37% of DOE's total budget in fiscal year 2025, down from 42% in fiscal year 2009. This is against the backdrop of substantial stresses on the New York City educational system, such as the loss in federal stimulus funding, the enrollment of tens of thousands of students from families seeking asylum, and lastly, the state's class size mandate. In stark contrast, other New York State municipalities such as Buffalo and Syracuse receive more than 80% of their school district funding from the state. I would like to propose several recommendations that would benefit students across the state, and in particular those in New York City, where 72% of students in New York City public schools live in poverty, 21% have disabilities, 14% are learning English as a new language, and more than 11% are living in temporary housing. 1, adopt more specific and equitable weights. The foundation aid formula no longer reflects the true costs associated with educating high-need children, nor does it include more nuanced measures of poverty. Students in temporary housing, students with disabilities, and students who are learning English as a new language all have unique needs and require specialized services and additional resources to provide them with an appropriate education. As an example, here in New York City this past school year, over 17,000 K-12 student individualized recommendations for services such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, or counseling went unfilled by the DOE. 41% of preschool-aged children were either not fully placed in a program or receiving their mandated services. The Comptroller's Office has recommended that DOE invest $100 million to scale its ability to provide these services, which would involve offering competitive rates to providers and financial incentives for graduate school licensure and certification to recruit DOE staff. This could be realized with adjustments to the formula that reflect the cost of an appropriate education for these students. It is time to introduce more specific measures to enable schools to better serve the varied requirements of different populations of high-need children. 2, fairly fund the cost of state-chartered charter schools in New York City. New York City bears a disproportionately high cost for charter schools relative to other municipalities in the state. It is the only district in the state required to pay the leases of charter schools, a cost only partially reimbursed by the state. Not only does this take away money from district schools, but it forces DOE to co-locate charter schools to avoid the cost. At a time when DOE needs all available space to meet the class size law, the charter lease requirement should be repealed. New York City is also the only district in the state excluded from receiving transitional aid for mandated charter school payments. The Comptroller asked the state use this opportunity to provide New York City with the same supplemental aid for charter school payments that the state provides to every other eligible district and eliminate the charter lease payment requirement. Continuing to require that New York City pay more for charter tuition payments is unfair to New York City students attending public district schools, which receive less foundation aid as a result. 3, adequately fund New York City to reduce class size. New York State Education Law, Section 211-D, requires New York City to reduce class sizes according to mandated targets, with a timeline and financial consequences imposed by the state. No other district in New York has this requirement. In his recent certification letter, Controller Lander noted that the city school district's education expense and capital funding plans do not provide sufficient funding to reduce class size as required by state law. City and state aid funding is sufficient to maintain current class size levels, which achieve the target set by the legislation for the 24 and 25 school year, but not higher targets set for subsequent years. We estimate that the incremental cost of the additional teachers required to meet these targets ranges between $374 million and $423 million in fiscal year 26, growing to between $1.5 billion and $1.7 billion at full implementation in fiscal year 2028. These costs are not covered by recent increases in state aid. Without additional support, this funding gap will mean cuts to art classes, to social workers and guidance counselors, to early childhood education. And as a recent analysis from our office shows, the majority of overcrowded classrooms in New York City are not in low-income Black and brown neighborhoods which have experienced significant declines in enrollment. Without added funding, these schools could see funding cuts in order for the DOE to meet class size targets in other parts of the city. As the state considers adjustments to the foundation aid formula, the unique requirements of the class size mandate in New York City must be taken into serious consideration. And lastly, 4, review the regional cost index and inflation factor adjustment. The DOE must contend with the high cost of operating in New York City. The Commission should review the regional cost index metric, which has not been updated since 2006. In addition, a consistent inflation factor that accurately reflects rising costs is necessary for all municipalities to maintain education levels over time. To conclude, New York City's high-need student populations, students who live in extreme poverty, students who are homeless, students with disabilities, students learning English, could themselves constitute an entire school system elsewhere. It is essential that the foundation aid formula provide all of these public school students with a sound basic education. Changes that foster greater funding equity and address the class size law and charter school spending are a good first step. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Panel, clarifications?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Corey Reynolds, the superintendent of the New Rochelle School District. He's not here. Joel's texting me when he gets here.
Good afternoon, everyone. To the panel, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today regarding the current state of the foundation aid formula. It is my distinct honor and privilege to stand before you as a proud superintendent of schools representing the students of the City School District of New Rochelle and as a board member of the New York State Association of Small City School Districts. This initiative of the current foundation aid formula was a bold move to fulfill New York State's constitutional responsibility of ensuring that every student has access to a sound basic education. Following the campaign for fiscal equity ruling, the state leadership chose to overhaul the financial support system for all districts, showcasing a commendable commitment to equitable education. The intent of the formula was, in concept, filled with hope. But some 16 years later, it has failed to deliver and must be revised to meet the current needs of students, school districts, and our state. The formula was based on the successful schools model, emphasizing bottom line spending rather than professional judgment. However, despite its intent, the formula has only been fully funded for 1 year. In all other years, it has been manipulated to balance the budget, failing to provide adequate support to students, thus impacting an entire generation. Balancing the state budget on the backs of students cannot continue. We, along with other statewide organizations, call for a comprehensive, costing out study to address these shortcomings. The formula's base, the foundation amount, was determined using the lower half of a list of successful schools' spending, which artificially suppresses the actual cost of providing a sound basic education. This list has been revisited only once in 17 years, rendering it outdated and unreliable. Many districts, once identified as successful, have not been successful by definition for years. Instead, the formula is based on the average spending of the lower half of a list of districts that may or may not be successful. A regular review and update of this list is necessary. The formula's regional cost index and other data, like the 2000 census, are also outdated and do not reflect the current needs of districts. The combined wealth ratio's artificial floors and ceilings further distort funding distribution, ignoring areas of extreme poverty while benefiting wealthier districts. Adjustments are necessary to ensure equitable distribution of foundation aid funding. Moreover, the formula's mechanisms have been politically manipulated. In the 24-25 budget, the CPI was arbitrarily substituted with a lower average to suppress spending, reigniting the pre-foundation aid budget fights, perpetuating the ineffective system of the haves and the have-nots based on regional inequities. This inconsistency harms students, undermines the formula's purpose, and is bad public policy. Many school districts, such as mine, are forced to do more with much less. The City School District of New Rochelle has chosen to remain committed to the whole child by funding much-needed school psychologists, social workers, and school counselors who are slated to be eliminated this year due to the expiration of the ESSER COVID relief funds. Had we not chosen to fund these social, emotional, and mental health practitioners through our general operating budget for the 24-25 school year, our students and families, regardless of home circumstance, would be the ones to suffer tremendous loss of post-COVID progress. Many of our families trust our school systems more than they trust the health system and rely on us for their health and household food and clothing security needs. Health and welfare in our schools should not be unfunded mandates. In the past 7 years between 2016 and 23, district-wide data has demonstrated an increase in the number of our students with needs. During those 7 years, students identified as economically disadvantaged have increased. Students identified as English language learners have increased. And our students with disabilities and the levels of disabilities have increased. During those 7 years, our district graduation rate of students identified as economically disadvantaged has increased from 78% to 84%. Graduation rates of students identified as English language learners have increased from 16 to 49%. And graduation rates of students with disabilities have increased from 57 to 65% in peak years, all with less funding. We, like many of our fellow school districts, are faced with the Herculean task of educating ever-changing students during ever-changing times. We have the task of educating children from the age of 3 all the way up to their 22nd birthday in some cases. We must take students' minds beyond their perceived limitations and challenge them to a place of higher aspiration, regardless of their home circumstance. We must do this, especially for our students whose generational family circumstances do not allow them to perceive true success, because perception unchallenged becomes reality. The New York State Association of Small City School Districts advocates for a full, independent, costing out study to create a dynamic, fluid, predictable, multi-year formula that adapts to students' evolving needs. The Rockefeller Institute's review and recommendations are crucial, and we stand ready to support to support this effort with the necessary resources. Ensuring each student receives sufficient support for sound basic education must remain our top priority. On behalf of the students of the City School District of New Rochelle and on behalf of the New York State Association of Small City School Districts, I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are going to call David Banks, Chancellor of the New York City Schools. Chancellor Banks.
So good afternoon. My name is David Banks. I'm the Chancellor of New York City Public Schools, the largest school district in the nation. And as New York State reviews its foundation aid formula for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I welcome the opportunity to recommend ways that we can make this formula more effective and equitable. At the inception of mayoral accountability in 2002, the state and city contributed equally to New York City public schools. Later that decade, and after years of hard work by those who launched the campaign for fiscal equity, particularly State Senator Robert Jackson, the New York State Court of Appeals found that our students were not getting what they were due. It took over 15 years, but in fiscal year '24, the state finally made good on its promise by fully funding what was owed to our students. That's great news, but in the meantime, our needs have evolved, in part because our costs have increased, and in part because of the additional critical services that we now provide students and families. We've added 2 new grades, pre-K and 3K, for all families who want them. We've established community schools, rigorous and relevant career pathways, integrated services for students with disabilities, free full-day summer programming for over 100,000 students, extra support for our tens of thousands of newcomers, and much more. So even with full funding, the foundation aid that we are receiving has not kept pace. It is not nearly enough to support our students and the educational experience that they deserve. This year, the state also changed the formula's inflation metric, which cost New York City about $120 million. All the while, the city's contribution to our schools has increased far faster than the state's, meaning the funding will come from New York City's and only 37% from the state, a dramatic shift from the even split in 2002. Foundation aid represents our largest source of state funding, yet the $9.9 billion we will receive in fiscal year '25 is wholly insufficient to meet our needs. To fund our schools in a way that truly matches a robust public education in 2024, the state should review the successful school district model. In addition, we recommend these 4 very specific changes to the formula. Number 1, the formula should provide support for students in temporary housing and students in the foster care system to reflect the substantial needs of these populations, including the 40,000 plus newest New Yorkers who have arrived in our city since April of 2022. We have and will continue to provide intensive wraparound support for this population, including enrollment counselors, bilingual staff, translation services, students in temporary housing coordinators, and more. This comprehensive approach to meeting students' needs is costly, and while we have updated our local funding formula to better support students in temporary housing, this need is not currently covered by foundation aid. Secondly, to further support our most vulnerable populations, the state should increase special education weights to more fully and fairly serve all learners. Currently, special education students all receive the same weight from the formula, regardless of their need. We have over 200,000 students with disabilities, and with adequate funding, we could expand our best-in-class specialized programming, such as our renowned autism programs, to support every student based upon their individual needs. Third, the state should review and update the regional cost indices. The regional cost index has been fixed since the formula's inception over 15 years ago, while the cost of doing business in New York City has continued to grow. The city recently settled labor contracts supporting over 70,000 teachers and tens of thousands more staff. We need a formula that allows us to adequately invest in our workforce and purchase goods and services at what they cost in New York City. The state has already acknowledged this in formulas that are regularly updated, such as the building aid formula, with a much higher regional cost adjustment. The foundation aid formula should be regularly updated as well. And finally, the state should designate dollars specifically to support class size reduction. We are the only district in the state that are required to meet a new class size mandate, yet we've received no additional funds to account for it. Reduced class sizes is a worthy goal, but we currently do not have the funding to get to 100% compliance by 2028. The task before us is immense. We anticipate needing to hire 10,000 to 12,000 new teachers, not to mention the capital costs of purchasing and building scores of schools and converting hundreds of classroom spaces. Both the Independent Budget Office and the New York City Comptroller's Office estimated that the full compliance will cost over $1.5 billion in new staff expenses alone. We believe the state should provide funding for this work consistent with the mandate, whether it's within or outside of foundation aid. Ultimately, the data shows that we are on the right track at New York City Public Schools. Our graduation rates have surpassed 80%. We've experienced our first enrollment increase in more than 8 years. And in 2023, student proficiency increased 12 points in math and nearly 3 points in ELA, outpacing gains in the rest of the state. To extend and accelerate this progress, we need a strategic investment of increased foundation aid. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Chancellor
you.
Banks.
Questions?
Questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mike Rebell, Executive Director of the Center of Education Equity at Columbia University Teachers College.
Okay, thank you. I'm Michael Rebell, and I guess my good friend and colleague Robert Jackson has already introduced me. Bob and I led the charge for the CFE litigation that, as you all know, and so many people have mentioned, established a constitutional right for all children in the state of New York to receive a meaningful opportunity for a sound basic education. Now, I want to emphasize that constitutional mandate that was issued by our highest court in the state of New York, the Court of Appeals, because that decision was announced in 2003, but it is the constitutional law in the state of New York in 2024, and it will be for all the years to come. What does CFE require? It requires a meaningful educational opportunity for all students to receive a sound basic education. Now, in addition to making that general statement, the court went on to say that the state has an obligation to provide the necessary resources for all students to receive that opportunity. And I want to quote you the exact language that the court used in discussing what that opportunity, that financial opportunity, has to be. What the court specifically said is that the state must determine, quote, the actual cost of providing a sound basic education. And once it's established what that actual cost is, it must establish a fair, need-based funding system that would ensure that, quote, every school would have the resources necessary for providing the opportunity for a sound basic education. So, the state has a continuing obligation to determine what is the actual cost of providing a sound basic education. We've heard from just about every one of the speakers who spoke today so far, and I'm sure we'll hear further comments in the moments to come, that the state is not providing that sound basic education to all our kids, and they have not determined the actual cost of providing a sound basic education in 2024. They did determine it in 2007. That's when this original foundation aid formula was constructed. And we were very pleased with the formula because at that time, it was calculated to provide the actual number of dollars needed for sound basic education. But as many people have already said, that was 17 years ago. A lot's happened. Chancellor Banks, the superintendent from New Rochelle, so many other speakers, Bob Jackson, have talked about all the areas where needs have changed. Over 17 years, we've had great demographic changes. We've had pandemic learning losses. We've had the onslaught of migrant students. We've had huge increases in students in temporary housing in New York. All kinds of other things that are not taken into account by this formula. So I want to say that I very much appreciate the Rockefeller Institute calling this hearing and inviting me to speak, but I'm going to be very blunt about it. The mission on which the Rockefeller Institute is now engaged will be helpful, but it's basically unconstitutional. The state right now is out of compliance with the requirements of Article 11 of the Constitution. They're out of compliance with the CFE case because they are not even attempting to determine what is the actual cost of a sound basic education. What's required for that? It's what the superintendent from New Rochelle just mentioned, a comprehensive cost analysis, starting from scratch. What are the needs? What are the needs for kids in New York City, in New Rochelle, anywhere else in the state? That's the job that the state needs to undertake. Now, the Rockefeller Institute, I'm sure, will come up with proposals that will improve somewhat the current totally outdated formula. And that's better than where we may have been without their proposals. But that is not complying with the Constitution. That is not meeting the children's needs. And for that reason, I want to announce today that our Center for Educational Equity at Teachers College has felt that we have an obligation because of our tie to the CFE case, because of our commitment to it, to begin the process of developing that formula since the state has decided not to do so. You know, 2 years ago, we thanked Governor Hochul. She was the one who made sure, along with our legislative leaders, that that old formula would finally be paid out. But we asked the question then, what happens after the formula is paid out? It's going to be paid out in 2023. What happens in 2024? We need a new formula. Everybody knew that 2 years ago. We petitioned for an independent commission to develop that formula. That was rejected. We then joined the call of the State Ed Department, and we asked that they be funded. They wanted $1 million to hire national experts to help them develop a new formula. The governor vetoed that last year. Instead, she asked the Rockefeller
Mr. Rebell,
Institute
could you please
to-
start to wrap this up? You're out of time.
Okay, if I can just finish, I want to announce what we're going to try to do. Because the state is not doing it, we want to start this process. We are engaging the American Institutes for Research, AIR, one of the foremost national expert groups in this area, to start developing a whole new formula. We're going to take their data analyses, we're going to work with stakeholder groups, we're going to work with parents, teachers in New York City throughout the state, and we're going to begin the process of developing that formula. Along the way, we hope to contribute suggestions for improving next year's formula. We hope to work with the Rockefeller Institute, with other groups that are concerned about this. Yes, next year's formula can be better, it should be. But it's not compliance with the Constitution.
Thank you.
It's not full sound basic education, and that's what we're committed to do, and we are going to begin that process and hope that all of you will join with us in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Arlen Benjamin-Gomez, Executive Director of Ed Trust, New York.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me here to talk about the Foundation Aid study being led by the Rockefeller Institute. I'm Arlen Benjamin-Gomez. I'm the Executive Director of Ed Trust New York. We're a statewide nonprofit organization that focuses on educational equity. The Foundation Aid formula has a profound impact on students, including students of color and those from low-income backgrounds. While the needs of these students have been growing for years, districts have been hamstrung due to years of state underfunding of the Foundation Aid formula, which was not fully funded until this school year, 17 years after it was first passed by the state. A 2018 Alliance for Quality Education report showed that the state underfunded 25 high-needs districts, majority Black and Latinx districts, by $2.6 billion, contributing to the challenges faced by districts prior to the pandemic. We know these challenges were only exacerbated by the pandemic. Multiple studies have shown that students of color and students from low-income backgrounds in particular have had the high disproportionate experience in unfinished learning, and this is illustrated by 2022-2023 New York State assessment scores that show that only 42% of New York City public school students were reading at third grade reading and eighth grade math. While we are grateful that the foundation aid formula was fully funded, we believe that more needs to be done to address these challenges that have been exacerbated by underfunding over the years and the pandemic. We agree that the foundation aid formula needs to be updated and improved. However, we believe any changes need to be equity focused, of course. Current student outcomes make it clear that any funding cuts to New York City public schools would likely exacerbate equity gaps across the city. Additionally, New York City Public Schools has been making important new investments in evidence-based reading and newly math instruction, and we're concerned that any cuts to New York City could impede these new initiatives. At the same time, as folks have mentioned, implementing the new class size law is very costly in New York City. There isn't increased funding from the state to support that, and so we want to make sure that all these costs are taken into account as you think about changes to the funding formula. Before sharing our recommendations specifically on the formula, I do want to just say that we're concerned about the aggressive timeline of the study, which we know is not driven by you, but we want to state that we're concerned about that. We think the comprehensive and data-driven process requires it's more important than like state fiscal or political considerations that could be driving this initiative. We're concerned about we're in the high school in the middle of summer. There's not a lot of people here. It's not the best time to be engaging the community to get input on such an important study. That being said, our recommendations around the study, we think it's important to look at the base formula costs using the successful school district model. This model hasn't been updated by the New York State Education Department since 2012. It doesn't reflect changes in state assessments and standards, and it is not generally representative of large urban districts and small rural districts. As a result, we think the study should explore methodologies, consult with school finance experts, and look at models such as New Jersey's professional judgment panel methodology. Regarding regional costs, that's also been talked about as well. Regional costs in New York City have gone up dramatically. They haven't been updated since 2006 in the formula, so we think that needs to be looked at as well. Regarding the poverty measure, the formula looks at free and reduced price lunch and the number of school-aged children living in poverty according to 2000 census data. That's obviously very outdated, but we also think that there's more creative ways to think about measuring poverty throughout the state. Alternative measures moving away from free reduced price lunch, which is no longer as reliable, to looking at means-tested programs like Medicaid. Maryland has successfully done this. Tennessee is piloting this. We think New York should move in that direction. We think there should be both a per pupil weight for poverty, but also a concentrated poverty weight like California does, where they double the weight for high needs districts with a concentration of students above 55%. Finally, we think it's important to think about tiers of socioeconomic status and not just a yes-no poverty weight, but how are we differentiating funding for school districts who have students with different socioeconomic backgrounds and needs. Regarding multilingual learners, since 2007, it's been a single weight. We think that needs to be differentiated so that you can look at both language proficiency levels, because that differentiates the needs and expenses that educating those students, and program types. We have 3 program types in New York, and we should look at what the costs of those different programs are. Additionally, thinking about the migrant students, and just in general, historically in New York, looking at students with interrupted formal education, there are subgroups of multilingual learners that just have different needs. With regard to students with disabilities, again, we think there needs to be a differentiated weights. Different states are doing different work on that. Tennessee is looking at 10 different weights. Other states look at 3 to 5 different weights. We think there needs to be some look at both the needs of the students and the instructional models that they're receiving and what the differentiated costs are associated with that. Also, as has been stated, New York City has consistently had a large population of students in temporary housing and foster care youth, and we think there should be an additional way to support the needs of those students. And finally, I want to highlight the need for data transparency. Since districts have significant flexibility in how foundation and funds are allocated and used, there has to be public transparency. There was a law, Education Law 3614, that from 2018 to 2023 required districts to report out their spending. That law has since been repealed, and we're concerned that we have no insight into how the funds are actually being spent. And some of the data analysis that we've been able to do, for example, shows that while New York City, for example, receives weight for multilingual learners, schools that have higher concentrations of multilingual learners are not actually spending more per pupil than schools that have lower concentrations of multilingual learners. So we just don't have enough data to understand why is that happening, and data transparency is a really important part, not just giving the money, but how is the money being spent. So thank you for your time. I look forward to continued conversation and submitting written testimony as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arlen.
Thank you.
Any Clarifying
Question?
questions? No, thank you so much. Mr. Ron Clamser, Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Facilities, and Operation at Dobbs Ferry.
While he's coming up, I would say the last speaker raised the transparency issue, and that's one I think we're taking a really serious look at, because all of this stuff really depends on people knowing what they're getting and why. And so we're looking particularly at, as well as all these issues, at making sure people know why they're getting what they're getting. Thank you. Sorry.
No problem. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Ron Clamser, Jr. I am the Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Facilities, and Operations at Dobbs Ferry Union Free School District, located just 22 miles north of here in Lower Westchester County. I have been a school business official for 18 plus years, having worked in a variety of school districts, including one in rural upstate New York that relied a little more heavily on state aid, and then the most recent 10 years in the lower Hudson Valley in 2 different districts who were a little less reliant on utilizing state aid. I also spent 4 years at a BOCES. For almost all of those 18 years, I've been an active member of the Association of School Business Officials in New York, a good part of which I've been privileged to serve on the Government Relations Committee, advocating for our member districts statewide. I'm currently on the association's board of directors, and I am serving as president-elect of the association. So I speak today not just as one voice through one lens, but as a voice of many representing the diverse needs of our membership throughout the state. If I spoke today as only one voice, I would tell you about Dobbs Ferry Union Free School District, a district of approximately 1,500 students, and how over the past few years that we have been recipients of the additional state aid through the full phase-in funding of the Foundation Aid formula. State aid represents approximately 16% of our total revenues, with Foundation Aid making up 61% of that total. Over the past 6 years since I've been at Dobbs Ferry, our enrollment has fluctuated from a low of around 1,490 to a high of 1,516, a difference of only 26 students, or approximately 1.7% change. It's important to note, however, that those numbers do not represent a steady growth in enrollment, but more of a roller coaster kind of bouncy ball effect where it's up one year and down the other year. But on the contrary, what has been a steady growth, or maybe I should say more appropriately described as a spike in growth, has been the increase in student needs. More specifically, our students require more social emotional services, more behavioral interventions, more instructional remediation, and a variety of additional supports, needs that have grown exponentially post-COVID. This is not something that is unique to Dobbs Ferry. Rather, this is a message I hear from my colleagues across the state, which leads me to my message today as a voice of the many. My message to you today can be reduced actually to just one word: predictability. One of the main arguments for creating the Foundation Aid formula was to bring predictability to school funding. Before the formula, districts had to wait for the state budget negotiations to learn how much aid they would get the following year. Unfortunately, this reality did not change much after 2007. Prior to the last few years, the financial aid amounts were largely beholden to the political influence of state budget negotiations. After the final phase-in promise was put in place in 2001, subsequent changes manipulated the formula, such as changes in the allowable inflation, which caused large swings in how much the formula was allowed to generate, essentially taking the entire state off formula. Under that scenario, Dobbs Ferry actually lost money in state aid. Speaking for our association, this lack of predictability is a challenge, even for a group of school finance professionals such as myself and my colleagues who live and breathe school finance every single day, much less for administrations and for the public that we serve. But it's also important to note that even once the phase-in under the current formula is complete, and even where there is a loss in enrollment, expenses do not stop growing. Loss of enrollment doesn't always translate to an equivalent reduction in staff, as those enrollments are usually spread over multiple grade levels and not typically clustered around a cohort. In addition, student needs, as previously mentioned, there are fixed costs that districts must deal with, and we incur to keep our buildings open and our buses running, such as annual fuel increases and energy rate increases. Also, an expense that constitutes approximately 75 to 80% of any school district budget is related to salaries and benefits. These include increases applied to step and lane movement for staff, as well as health insurance premiums and employee benefits, such as district contributions to the state retirement systems. In our short time today, I want to focus your attention on this issue of predictability. Representatives from our association and member districts will speak to other important issues at your future public hearings. I thank you for your time and for your consideration. We hope that our collective feedback will help the Institute in the work that has been charged with. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Question? Thank you. Andrew Rein, President of the Citizens Budget Commission.
How you doing? Got a long day before and ahead of you? Thanks for doing this. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us to contribute to this important effort. I'm Andrew Rein, President of the Citizens Budget Commission, a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank and watchdog dedicated to constructive change in the finances, services, and policies of New York City and New York State government. My comments today will present our preliminary analyses and recommendations, but we're going to come back to you later this summer as we keep on sharpening our pencils. The state constitution guarantees every student in grades K through 12 the right to a sound basic education. The goal of state education aid basically should be direct state resources where they're most needed to fulfill this guarantee, while considering the importance of equity and the ability and willingness and obligation of local districts to fund education with the local resources. First point I want to emphasize is that for the state to wisely and appropriately use its $39 billion of education aid, it must not only reform foundation aid, but also the 1/3 of aid allocated through various expense-based aids and the STAR program. We will not achieve equity while ignoring $13 billion of state funds. The second point I want to emphasize is that school aid reform is important not only to meet educational goals and the constitutional commitment, but also to the state's fiscal future. Education funding comprises 30% of the state operating fund spending, and the state, with its $16 billion structural budget gap, it needs to ensure that education spending is fiscally sustainable as well as equitable, or it's going to damage its capacity to provide services to New Yorkers and that New Yorkers need now and in the future. So our work addresses three problems. First, many provisions of the formulas inhibit aid from being directed to where it's needed most. Second, the calculation of local contribution undercounts what many wealthy districts can and do contribute, thereby directing over $2 billion of state aid every year to districts that already spend enough local resources to provide a sound basic education. And three, outdated poverty and cost factors miscalculate needs and costs. So to address these, we have 7 recommendations. First, to quickly phase out the hold harmless provision to align foundation aid with district enrollment and district wealth. The hold harmless provision prevents foundation aid from being allocated based on needs by guaranteeing that districts receive at least as much funding as they received in the prior year, even if enrollment fell or local wealth increased. That should be changed. Our second recommendation is to revise the expected local contribution to be the higher of the district's actual contribution or the district's actual fiscal capacity. The foundation aid formula currently inaccurately measures the district's capacity to raise local funds and uses multiple estimates seemingly intended to maximize the district's state aid. It uses these calculations even when districts provide more support than the state says it can, and therefore the state provides more resources well above what's needed for the constitutional guarantee. The formula should be modified to more accurately reflect local fiscal capacity and willingness to pay, ensuring the state aid is directed to higher need districts, not to districts that can already support education themselves. Third recommendation is to update district poverty estimates and regional cost measures for a more accurate assessment of need. The poverty and regional cost factors are severely outdated. They should be updated more often. The regions are too large. The regional cost index needs to be reevaluated. A lot of work to be done there, and we will come back with more specific recommendations. Fourth, you should reassess the arbitrary floors and ceilings and formulas to ensure that they are limited to extreme situations. Aid is distorted by arbitrary caps that require or limit aid, causing over or underfunding. Foundation aid has a minimum, for example, funding of $500 per pupil, ensuring that even the wealthiest districts receive some foundation aid. Additionally, expense-based aids like BOCES aid have minimum state contributions as high as 36% of expenses, really potentially directing more money to districts that have more capacity to pay. Many of these hard floors and ceilings should be reconsidered to ensure a more needs-based distribution, because remember, that is the general purpose of foundation aid. Fifth recommendation is to allocate library, textbook, and software aids based on wealth by modifying either the formula for those aids or folding that funds into foundation aid. It's around $224 million each year that's now funded on a per student basis, which would be better allocated whether in foundation aid or by having a wealth adjustment to those formulas. Sixth is to eliminate high tax aid. This funding stream is now around $223 million, initially intended to incentivize localities to raise more revenue, but now basically provides more aid per student to wealthy districts than below average wealth districts. Given its regressive allocation, lack of a clear function, high tax aid should be eliminated. And finally, eliminate the STAR program to better allocate state resources where it's needed most. The STAR program is around $3 billion now, and it benefits homeowners in wealthier districts and with higher property values, and excludes renters. It provides around $2,000 per student in wealthy counties like Putnam, Nassau, and Westchester, and as little as $500 per student in Jefferson County. Eliminating the STAR program will allow those state resources to be allocated either to other fiscal needs, programmatic needs, or within education more appropriately. Furthermore, while we don't have recommendations today, we believe you should also examine two other areas that are in need of improvement. One is the factors used to provide extra resources for special student needs, special education, English language learners, possibly unhoused students and others. They appropriately drive a lot of dollars, and getting this right is key, as we've heard today, to supporting districts to best address their needs. And finally, there is no tie between state aid and district performance. CBC strongly believes that the state should take a more active role promoting performance and spreading best practices, increasing transparency, and improving accountability, especially given the vast amount of resources provided and the criticality of education to New Yorkers and our state's future. We spent $39 billion. We spent $13 billion of federal COVID aid without ensuring it was going to help students. We've increased foundation aid almost 30% over 3 years without a mechanism to make sure students are benefiting. We need that accountability to be part of this so the students of New York get what they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.
Anyone? No? Thank you so much. Brittany Kaiser, member of the Alliance for Quality Education.
Hi, my name is Kaiser. I'm the New York City organizer at the Alliance for Quality Education. AQE is a coalition mobilizing communities across New York State to ensure that every student, regardless of zip code, receives a high-quality public education. Our mission is rooted in dismantling systemic racism and economic oppression in New York's public schools, particularly for Black, Brown, low-income, and immigrant students. Well-funded schools are at the heart of strong, thriving communities. In 2007, the foundation aid formula was created as a remedy to the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit, aiming to provide sufficient resources to offer all students in New York a constitutionally mandated sound basic education. This past year, in September 2023, marked the first time that school districts across the state started their school year with 100% of their foundation aid allocation. However, the state's failure to fully fund the formula over these 16 years has created lasting disparities, particularly in high-need, majority Black, Brown, low-income, and rural school districts. Moreover, the foundation aid formula enacted in 2007 does not reflect the true cost of education in 2024. A constitutionally adequate funding formula should respond to the needs of students in the 21st century, taking into consideration the challenges the pandemic brought, changing demographics like housing insecurity, rising poverty levels, and income inequality, as well as advancements in school finance, current curriculum standards, and the values and needs of communities across New York State. An updated foundation aid formula should accurately assess the base cost needed for a sound basic education using up-to-date methodologies, as well as accurately assessing student need. This could include utilizing multiple measures to more accurately identify the prevalence of student poverty, conducting studies to determine the additional resource needs generated by student poverty, evaluating the costs of effective strategies for supporting multilingual learners, and properly assessing the cost of educating students with disabilities. As a former teacher, I've seen firsthand and from multiple vantage points how improved state funding can narrow gaps in educational experiences and outcomes for students. I taught at MS-50 in Brooklyn. MS-50 is part of the Community Schools program funded in part by Foundation Aid. Their award-winning debate team made history by becoming the first team to ever debate at the National Speech and Debate Association competition in a language other than English. MS-50 is a Title I school, and many of its students are new immigrants with interrupted formal education. For some of them, Spanish language debate permanently transformed their relationship with schooling for the better. I also taught at the Earth School in Manhattan, where I repeatedly saw students who came to us with significant needs and grew to be enthusiastic and confident learners in a year or less. We were able to achieve this through extensive targeted intervention, which was a team effort among classroom teachers, several speech teachers, an English as a new language teacher, a psychologist, a school counselor, a social worker, and others. Under the current Foundation Aid formula, successes like this are possible, but because the formula hasn't kept pace with current education costs, the successes come at the cost of other essential programs, staff, and services. Administrators may be forced to choose between maintaining a science or art program versus retaining a full-time school counselor. There are rarely sufficient funds to configure classes that are small enough to meet students' needs. Vital services like after-school programming are perpetually at risk, even if they are make or break for many students and their families. If the Foundation Aid formula is adjusted to better reflect the cost of educating our children, we can achieve amazing things. If the formula is adjusted such that funding is decreased, even a little, the on-the-ground impacts will be disastrous, and they will affect our most vulnerable learners most dramatically. Updating the funding formula needs to be done in consultation with community members, and we at AQE are concerned that many parents will face barriers to engaging in this study process, including from some of the districts in the state most reliant on the support provided by Foundation Aid. Many communities have limited public transportation options to attend the nearest hearing location. A person from Rochester would have to travel over an hour and a half by bus to attend a hearing. From Syracuse, participation would require nearly 2 hours and access to a car. Some of the districts that depend the most on the state for school aid are rural districts, yet many such communities in the North Country are 3 hours away from their closest hearing. This is not a zero-sum choice. More hearings in both rural and urban communities would help ensure this process is inclusive and accessible to all. I do want to acknowledge that the Rockefeller Institute will be providing translation via recording and will welcome speakers in languages other than English. That is the kind of attention to access we need to see in every step of this process. At a time of deepening inequities, our public schools serve every child, embracing all abilities and identities without exception. Fully and equitably funding our public schools so they are able to meet students' needs is not merely a priority, it is an absolute necessity. Governor Hochul's charge to consider the Foundation Aid formula's, quote, fiscal sustainability must not overshadow New York's constitutional obligation to provide every student with a sound basic education. Underfunding public education is not only unsustainable, but also unjust. Our youngest New Yorkers should never shoulder the burden of austerity budgets. We cannot afford to deny our students the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. Investing in education is investing in a just and prosperous future for all New Yorkers. Thank you for your attention and time put towards this process to ensure a high-quality education for all New York students.
Thank you. Thank you, Brittany.
Thanks.
Clarification?
No, but I would say to Brittany and to everyone, we get that the time frame being considered by us kind of limits the amount of time we can do public hearings, but please feel free, and we try to be open in as many alternative methods of reaching people as possible, including, video conferencing, anything. So if there are groups that feel like they need to get in touch with us and traveling is a difficult thing, we'll figure out a way to accommodate that.
Thank you, Ben. Raymond Sanchez, Superintendent of the Ossining School District.
Good afternoon. So just a slight edit, I'm the superintendent of the Terrytown Schools, but was former superintendent of the Ossining School District. And I apologize in advance, I'm getting used to some new reading glasses, so bear with me. So thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony today to the topic of foundation aid and school funding. I deeply appreciate your willingness to listen to stakeholders as you formulate your final recommendations. My name is Ray Sanchez, and I'm the superintendent of the Terrytown School District and a member of the NISCUS Executive Board. I've been an educator for over 25 years, including 12 years as superintendent of schools in Ossining and in Terrytown. When discussing school funding, it is critical to remember that this is ultimately about children. Children with diverse needs, children with different abilities, different interests and backgrounds from various parts of New York State. Despite their differences, all children can achieve if provided with the right resources and we surround them with caring adults. We should remember that today's schools are different from those in the past. For example, in my district, we are doing much more for our students and families, addressing needs beyond academics, by providing mental health services, dental clinics, child care, after-school care, and food assistance. In my prior district, where I served for 25 years, we consistently advocated for fair and equitable funding to support our students. While we celebrated the achievement of full funding, we recognized the need for a comprehensive review of the foundation aid formula, which has remained largely unchanged for 16 years. I offer the Ossining School District as an example of the need to update the data. Since the foundation formula was established in 2008, the Ossining School District has experienced more than 24% increase in enrollment, more than 53% increase in free and reduced lunch price applicants, and more than 59% increase in the students with extraordinary needs, a 70% increase in students living in poverty, and a 31% decrease in the combined wealth ratio. While this community, again, has been fully funded, the needs in the community do not reflect its current funding state, support levels. So what changes do I suggest? Number one, census. The formula relies on poverty data from the 2000 census, which is outdated given the current realities our school face. Separately, I do caution against relying on free and reduced lunch as a major component of data used to determine the needs of districts. As we have seen, completing applications has become harder for districts to collect when becoming eligible for free breakfast and lunch programs. Two, regional cost index. The existing formula's regional cost index causes untenable variations between neighboring districts. Therefore, to adjust this ongoing, I recommend amending the regional cost index to create a lower Hudson Valley region that is more reflective of the high cost of operating in the suburbs of New York City, similar to that of Long Island. Three, changes in enrollment. A component of the formula should consider to provide help to districts experiencing surge in enrollment in the same year it occurs. As an example, as a superintendent, I experienced an increase of more than 100 students, which calls for more resources, including hiring teachers, a cost that was about $500,000 that was unbudgeted at the time. I also ask you to consider the weighting of students, specifically English language learners and special education students. The formula should reevaluate the current 0.5 weighting provided to help English language learning students. These scholars come from diverse backgrounds, have varying degrees of educational attainment, include new arrived pupils with no prior formal education, students with interrupted instruction, otherwise known as SIFE, children from incoming refugee communities, unaccompanied minors, and children whose home language is not English. In order to be responsive to the needs of English language learners, we need teachers, support services, and more, and this calls for more equitable funding. In addition to English language learners, special education is another area to reconsider the weighting. Since 2017, we have seen steady increase in special education needs. As an example, the classification rate in a Westchester school district has risen from approximately 400 students to 600, or 8% classification rate to 13%. The county of Westchester has risen from 14% to 17%, and the state has risen from 17 to 19%. This is most acutely felt in the needs for special education staff, even though the overall population is relatively stable. Regionally, we have seen an increase in school refusal. Some regional school districts have had to expand emotional support programs to provide significant professional development around mental health identification and base level intervention. Additionally, there are more students requiring intensive therapeutic environments. While absolute numbers of students required for these programs are not large, these incremental changes in these students represent a major cost center. The cost of residential placement can run about $150,000. This, coupled with the shortage of a quality residential state-approved placements, has led to additional costs to local districts in the region. Finally, we seek a formula that will help us plan ahead. In other words, if we can predict it, we can plan for it. As a superintendent, creating budgets to meet the needs of students, support staff, and remain fiscally responsible is crucial. However, state aid has often been the hardest variable to predict. Stable and predictable funding is essential for effective planning. One idea is a 3-year rolling average that is updated annually. This will allow school districts to be more prepared and strategic in their budgeting and to adequately plan for the needs of their district without overburdening the taxpayers.
Could you please wrap it up? We're out of time.
Here we go. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the topic of foundation aid and school funding. I deeply appreciate your willingness to listen to stakeholders as you consider the changes to ensure equitable funding for our students in the state of New York.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good. Marian Bott, Education Finance Specialist for the New York League of Women Voters.
Good afternoon. Bob Megna, everyone knows because of many long years of negotiating budgets. Lisa and Lucy, I'm new to you and you're new to me. I have been a lobbyist, an academic, a student of Michael Rebell, a student of Hank Levin, and for the last 25 years, I've been testifying about wonky things like the regional cost index and the poverty index on behalf of, for the last 21 years, for the New York State League of Women Voters as our education finance specialist. And before that, I represented the Educational Priorities Panel in New York City, which was a 26-member coalition of civic organizations. And we concerned ourselves primarily with the rollout of CFE. And so I have thick notebooks, which my husband wishes I would throw away, with the backup school aid runs for many, many years. So I'm going to drill down into some of the things that the League and EPP in the past have concentrated on, and I'm just going to stick with two things. One is the regional cost index, and the other is the poverty index. So on the regional cost index, many people wanted it to happen in the 1990s. SED pushed for it. They went to other states and sought advice, and specifically a study from Oregon was used as the model for the rollout of the regional cost index. Richard Rothstein, who was one of my professors at Teachers College, was one of the co-authors of the study. They recommended for Oregon that they use 26 regions. Oregon has 32 counties. I've still been trying to find out from one of the co-authors why, when it came to negotiating with New York State, we ended up with 9 regions. We never should have ended up with so few regions. It's caused all sorts of problems, as we now know. As to the politics and the economics of why it was supposed to have been updated, data were made available, data still are available, and in fact, I'm in the midst of a FOIL request right now to obtain the most recent data for the Regional Cost Adjustment Labor Wage Index. It's all politics and economics. In 2009, a governor was stuck in a situation where there was no money. Money was being taken away from school districts. And then the other factor was, and still is, that every time a governor announces a budget, there are words in writing that say, here are the 9 regions, here are their weightings, so be it. So the 3 principles involved with making changes that are both economic and political are, let me see if I can get my glasses on here. You have 3 principles. You have the burden. Are new data available? Are they difficult to collect? You have the credibility. Even if you have new data, would you believe your new labor data? And then the third, most importantly, is distribution. We've heard earlier today that New York City is a high labor market. Well, we know that. But if all of a sudden the index goes from 1,000 in the North Country, and it's now 1.426 in New York City, and someone says, oh, well, we could rescale it, but then in New York City it would be 1.8. There will be winners and losers. So now, we know that the Rockefeller Institute has labor experts. We know that other academic institutes right here in our state do have labor experts, and you can work on these data. The data do exist. The question is, will there be the political will to make the changes that we know need to be made and to broaden the number of labor regions in order to make sure that such broad areas such as the Lower Hudson Valley do not have Westchester and other far less costly labor markets included in the same market. Okay, that's enough on regional cost index. The other is the poverty indicators. Since you all have been studying the formula already, you know that the poverty weight is half FERPL and half census. So again, back to these principles of if you know that these data are not only inaccurate, but out of date, then how do you improve them? There was a major report put out by SED in 2016 after the community eligibility provision was put into place under the Obama administration, trying to say, we know this is going to be wrong, we know that because kids don't have to fill in these forms anymore, their parents don't have to fill in the forms anymore, we know we will have undercounts. So the report basically said, here are 6 or 7 different other ways you could do this, but the problem is that the SED report failed to come out with strong recommendations because of the trade-offs. They balanced the burden, the credibility, and the distribution, and they said there's no perfect improved answer. So where are we today with this? We know that we have better direct certification data. Some of the other speakers have talked about the fact that there are ways and means of finding out the poverty status of a student. I've had, in my recommendations, I said, maybe I should quote it so that I don't paraphrase. Okay. To provide the most updated data, require this fall that school districts provide a count of newly enrolled school-aged migrants in their pre-K through 12 school programs. This would allow the state to estimate poverty percentages for students enrolled in October 2024, but currently not considered to be in poverty at all. Statistically, some percentage of them would be. Within a few years, depending upon which data government agencies decide to collect, these estimates may provide a truer picture of student poverty than our existing metrics. This update will resonate in all parts of the state where migrants have been appearing in record numbers. So here's the trick. You have to figure out what data are you allowed to collect? What data do you need to collect? And how will the redistribution of those poverty weightings be affected by that?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.
I hope I don't butcher this name, and I apologize if I do. John Liszewski, Finance Commissioner for the City of Yonkers. I did all right. See, that's a come from having one of those Italian names that people can't pronounce. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to give the City of Yonkers a chance to discuss the Foundation Aid formula. My name is John Liszewski. I'm the Commissioner of Finance for the City of Yonkers and for the Board of Education in the City of Yonkers. We're a Big Five school district. For the past 13 years, Mayor Spano has lobbied Albany about the fundamental flaws in the formula. While we appreciate the existing Foundation Aid formula has been fully funded, it doesn't compensate for the fact that it is a flawed formula. On behalf of Mayor Spano, I respectfully submit the challenges the City of Yonkers faces on how the formula is currently calculated. We all know that the Foundation Aid formula is supposed to disperse state aid in such a way as to eliminate inequities among school districts with different abilities to tax local taxpayers. During the past 13 years, Mayor Spano's administration has raised the city's contribution to education each and every year for a cumulative amount of $498 million. This has added 135% to the citizens' property tax increases over these years. Additionally, 10 years ago, the city assumed $10 million in administrative costs of the Board of Education annually, freeing up in excess of $100 million to be invested back into the classroom. When the state temporarily increased AIM aid this year, $5 million was immediately awarded to the Board of Education maintenance of effort in perpetuity. The taxpayers of Yonkers have done more than their fair share in contributing to the education of children. When federal funds became available, although there were warnings against using the money on recurring expenses, the Yonkers Board of Education had no choice but to spend the money to address the social and emotional needs of the children. The ratios of guidance counselors, social workers, psychologists, and support staff were inadequate to begin with and became even more stretched during the COVID pandemic. That money had been utilized over 3 years. Now that money has dried up. Despite the budget shortfalls, Yonkers is proud of its many successes. Yonkers has the highest urban graduation rate in the state. It has received national recognition for our My Brother's Keeper program from President Obama, and the list goes on and on. The folks in Albany ask us each year, why are you back with the same old problem? Why are you looking for a handout? The reason we are forced to come back year after year with the same old problem is because the Board of Education's budget is structurally imbalanced due primarily to a lack of recurring state aid. The Foundation Aid formula does not address the needs of our Yonkers children. Yonkers is situated in affluent Westchester County and borders New York City, which means our property values are relatively high. That works against us in the Foundation Aid formula. Our regional cost index groups us with upstate New York, where the cost of living is much lower, but our expenses are more in line with New York City and Long Island, considering that we share a common labor workforce. Our special education costs, especially when considering high-cost students, far outsurpass most districts and continue to grow faster than any other expenditures. There are a number of unique circumstances affecting Yonkers that need to be addressed while you consider amending the Foundation Aid formula. The majority of our children are Black and brown children. Greater than 70% of our student population is below the poverty level. Many of our children are immigrants requiring ESL classes. Approximately 20% of the students receive special education. The fact that Yonkers, the third largest district in the state, with all of the challenges of a large urban district, ranks 222nd in the state in Foundation Aid per pupil unit. Let me repeat that. With all the challenges that our urban city faces, Yonkers ranks 222nd in the state in the Foundation Aid per pupil unit. is clear evidence that the formula is failing in its effort to provide equity. Our children deserve to have the same educational opportunity as every other child in the state. Despite the chronic underfunding, they continually achieve the highest graduation rate of any big city. They deserve to have art, music, and sports. They deserve to have an emotional and social resources that every other child in Westchester County and beyond have. Imagine what they could do if they were given equity and fairness. As I previously laid out, the taxpayers of Yonkers are doing their fair share. It's time for the state to fix the formula and give Yonkers children what they deserve and are entitled to. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Questions? Rita Joseph, New York City Council member and chair of the Committee on Education.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am New York City Council member Rita Joseph, representing the 40th Council District in Brooklyn, and I also serve as the chair of the Education Committee. As a forever educator with 20 years of experience in our city's public school system, I've seen firsthand the growing needs of our students, and as the education chair, committed to ensuring that our school receive the resources they need to support all students. During the 2022 to 2023 school year in New York City, more than 119,000 students, roughly 1 in 9, experienced homelessness. 148,000 students, which is 14.1, were also English language learners. 219,000 of our students, more than 1 in 5, has a disability. New York City faces a growing need for resources due to expiration of federal stimulus funding, a new class size requirement, and enrollment of around 40,000 newly arrived students in temporary housing. Every day, I hear from parents of these students struggling to get the education services and support they need. While we appreciate the recent increase in state education funding, New York City still contributes 57% of the city's education budget, while the state only contributes 37%. The foundational aid formula includes outdated measures of need, has not kept pace with growing costs, and does not include any additional funding for students in temporary housing as we approach change to the foundation aid formula. I urge you to focus on equity and ensure that school districts have the funds they need to provide a high-quality education to students who need the most support, including students in temporary housing, students with disabilities, and ENL students. So I propose the following things to update the foundational aid to reflect the true cost of educating students today. My recommendation: adding weights for students in temporary housing, re-examining the weights for students with disabilities, ENL students to better reflect costs, including considering differentiation programs, updating the regional cost index to better reflect the growing cost of salaries and services, ensure the formula take into account the funds the state's new class size requirement for New York City. These changes are necessary. Ensure that every student receive a high quality education regardless of their zip code and regardless of their circumstances. So we're calling on the state to really reconsider how we formulate the foundational aid. New York City was able to recalculate the fair student funding to meet these needs by adding poverty and high need districts. So we're also asking the state to meet us with these new recommendations as well. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Julia Konrad, Assistant Director at the New York City Independent Budget Office.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Julia Konrad, and I'm the Assistant Director for Education at the New York City Independent Budget Office, or IBO. IBO is a nonpartisan, independent government agency mandated by the New York City Charter, and our mission is to enhance public understanding of New York City's budget, public policy, and economy through independent analysis. And in 2009, the New York State Legislature amended state education law to authorize IBO to provide analysis based on data and information from the New York City Department of Education. As a result, IBO has published many reports using student, school, and system-level information. In lieu of reading my full testimony, I'm going to focus today on certain components of the foundation aid formula that could be improved. And then I will describe the student need weights included in New York City's weighted student funding formula, known as Fair Student Funding, as a point of comparison. And if you're interested in the full testimony, please see me or IBO's website. So as has been discussed already today, there are several components of New York State's foundation aid formula that have not changed since the formula's creation. In the Pupil Need Index, the weights for different needs have remained the same since the formula was created in 2007. In addition, the U.S. Census-based share of students in poverty is still based on the 2000 decennial census. And finally, as been discussed, the Regional Cost Index remains at its 2006 levels. The formula selected foundation aid begins with a base foundation aid per pupil. This methodology identifies successful school districts by academic proficiency measures and then estimates the average per pupil cost within those districts. During the first 9 years of the formula, New York State updated this analysis of successful school districts 4 times. However, over the last 7 years, there have been no updates to this base per pupil amount, aside from a consumer price index adjustment. The use of an outdated per pupil amount has likely led to fiscal challenges for districts, as services needed to successfully educate students have increased since the COVID-19 pandemic. Updating this analysis will also impact the weight for students with disabilities. New York State may wish to consider alternative methodologies such as those that have been used in New Jersey's foundation funding formula, which draws upon a panel of experts. New York City's Department of Education has its own version of a weighted student formula, the Fair Student Funding Formula, which is used to distribute funds to most schools based on the specific needs of their students. Since its implementation in 2007-2008, the Fair Student Funding Formula has evolved over time, incorporating additional student needs as well as adjusting the weights for each need category. For the past school year, 2023 to 2024, there were 37 different student need weights across 7 broad categories. And notably, 2 of those categories were added as of this school year: students in temporary housing, as Chair Joseph said recently, and a weighted measure for schools with the highest relative concentration of particular needs. Each of these weights is meant to account for differences in the type of programming needed to support different students. New York City's grade level weights establish the base per pupil amount, and they vary by elementary, middle, and high school. There are academic intervention weights that consider students' incoming academic achievement levels, and those vary too, by the degree to which students' prior performance falls below standards or well below standards. For English language learners, the Fair Student Funding Formula varies by elementary and secondary level and takes into account the type of program in which students are enrolled, such as English as a new language or bilingual education classes. There are weights for students who have transitioned out of English language learner status and for all students whose formal education has been interrupted. Weights for students with disabilities vary by the frequency at which they receive those services, and the formula separately considers students with disabilities in integrated co-teaching classrooms and those placed in self-contained classrooms. Students in portfolio high schools receive additional funding for specialized career and technical education programs, or for any required specialized academic or arts-related instruction. And there are also weights for students in transfer schools. Finally, there are 2 new weights, as was mentioned, that were introduced this school year. First, the formula includes an additional weight for students in temporary housing, as this population has grown considerably over the past decade. And this school year, that new weight for students in temporary housing applied to 95,000 students out of the 777,000 students who are served through the Fair Student Funding Formula. Second, all schools within a school may receive additional funding if that school has concentrated need, a high proportion of students with specific needs relative to other New York City schools. This last school year, there were 303 schools that received additional funding for this weight, which directed additional funding to 85,000 students. Over time, New York City's formula has evolved so that today's formula includes new categories of student needs, as well as adjustments to the magnitude of certain weights. In contrast, New York State's foundation formula does not account for a student's grade level, nor the differing types of services provided to English language learners and students with disabilities, despite the differing costs associated with those types of services. New York State might consider an additional weight for students in temporary housing, or at a minimum, students in shelter. a group that an IBO study found to have much lower academic outcomes compared to students who were doubled up. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody again and the invited speakers for being here today and the testimony you've shared. Your input is vital to the Foundation Aid study. We will now take a brief recess before the second part of the hearing. We're going to reconvene here at 5:30. Doors will open at 5 o'clock, but we're asking folks to leave the auditorium so that the staff can get a bit of a break before the next part of the hearing, which is the public session. Thank you again for everybody who participated in part one, and thank you for coming.
Thank you all.
We'd like to welcome you to the first of 5 hearings on the state's Foundation Aid formula. My name is Anita Murphy. I am recently retired as the district superintendent at Capital Region BOCES in the Albany area. Previous to that, I was a superintendent of schools and spent the good majority of my career in the large cities school districts in New York State. I'm joined today by the president of the Rockefeller Institute, Mr. Robert Megna, and Dr. Lisa Parshall. Lisa is a professor of political science at Damon University and a Rockefeller Institute fellow. And Dr. Lucy Sorensen, an associate professor of public administration and policy at the University of Albany. Just as a reminder, the hearing is being live streamed. And a recording of the meeting will be posted online shortly after the conclusion of this evening's hearing on the Rockefeller Institute's website. Some audience members may be recognizable in the background. By remaining in the audience, you are consenting to the possibility of being in the background of some of today's recordings. A couple other housekeeping notes. We have an ASL interpreter with us who will be providing interpreter services to the right of the stage. And then, although we do not have other simultaneous interpretation services on site today, the transcript for today's hearing will be translated into multiple languages and posted online for public access. If you have questions about the Foundation Aid study or about the hearing, or if you need assistance with anything today, please talk to somebody with the name tags on our staff here. Emergency exits are located in the front of the auditorium and to either side. And before we begin, I would ask that everybody please silence your cell phones. As we proceed with the verbal testimony, we want to make sure that the panel can hear what you're saying and that other people are not interrupted. A couple of thank yous before we start. On behalf of the Rockefeller Institute, a sincere and special appreciation to Principal Darrell Banks and the staff of this high school, wonderful high school, at the High School of Fashion Industries, who welcomed us here today. They've been working with our staff for days and days, and we are extraordinarily appreciative of their time and effort to make this successful. Thank you for being incredibly gracious hosts. We'd also like to thank all of you who registered to speak. We really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time out of your busy schedules to be here. Just a background and context of this, our purpose of this evening is to hear the voices of the New York State community on the Foundation Aid formula for education funding. And we are here to talk about Foundation Aid formula. New York State's fiscal year 24-25 budget called for the Rockefeller Institute to conduct a study on how to modify or what to do with the Foundation Aid formula and discuss potential modifications on how the formula works. As a part of the study, the researchers are collecting feedback from the public in different regions of the state to inform the study. We're now starting the second part of this hearing today. And for this portion, we are allotting folks 2 minutes, 2 minutes to speak. I am going to be giving you cues and stopping you after 2 minutes. We would like everybody who wants to speak to be able to speak, and so please keep it to 2 minutes. I know that doesn't sound like it's that hard, but sometimes it is, and I will give you a cue. So I apologize in advance for holding people to time. So feedback from both the hearings this afternoon and tonight will be incorporated into the final version of the study. And it will be released sometime in December of 2024. I'm going to turn it over right now to Bob Megna to provide some introductory remarks and talk a little bit about the foundation aid. Just real quick before we go, we're going to be calling you up in groups, so I know you have cards with your numbers. Please be aware of what when we're calling folks up. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Listen, I'm going to be very brief because I think we're here tonight to hear from you. This afternoon, we heard from a group of policymakers and other folks from the education community, but I think we wanted to hear from, both the general public and those with an interest in the education environment. And so the foundation formula forms the heart, as Anita said, of state funding for education in this state. And I don't know if we're still doing these, but we're going to do 5 public hearings around the state. This is the first one. In New York City, we'll be going off to Buffalo and Farmingdale in Long Island, and Lorenz, which is a small upstate school district, and Guilderland, which is a suburban district outside of Albany. So again, and this is part of, I can't even tell you it's the complete foundation aid formula, but it is the mechanism by which the state allocates 75% of the money that goes to school districts. It's a complicated formula. There are parts of it that are clearly out of date. There are parts of it that no longer reflect the current realities on the ground in school districts. And we want to hear from you about those aspects of the formula and those aspects of foundation aid funding that are most important to you. So I'm going to stop talking, and we're going to have folks come up and tell us what they think about this.
Thanks, Bob. We're gonna start the registered speakers. Just a couple of things. There's a timer, so that you're gonna stand at the microphone. There's a timer right there. We'll set that to 2 minutes so that it can help you pace. Just something very important. The panel is here to listen today. They will not be responding or answering questions. This is a listening session only. We will call numbers from 1 to however many people are registered. If we have time, we will start at number 51 for those of you who are on the waiting list. Please give your testimony directly about foundation aid. That's all that this commission is doing. They're not talking about education policy. And please remember, again, to silence your cell phones. So I'm going to call speakers 1 to 5 up. We'll give you a minute to come up, 1 to 5. And then after speaker number 3, I'm going to call 6 to 10. And can you please tell us who you are? That would also be really helpful.
Hello, my name is Tanisha Grant. I am a mother of 3, a grandmother of 4, and I am a community organizer who has my own community-based organization Parents Supporting Parents New York, and we're based in Washington Heights and Central Harlem. First and foremost, I want to say that I'm a little disappointed because this panel doesn't reflect me at all. And this has been one of the big problems in education. Too many times we have people that don't have our lived experience, children that don't have our lived experience, being called to the floor to recommend things that's going to affect our lives and our children's lives, and it's not okay. All children in New York City by law are entitled to a sound basic education, and we know that this hasn't been happening because we had to fight for decades in the campaign for fiscal equity. Yes, we won the campaign for fiscal equity, but the current foundation aid formula was created in 2007. I don't think it's appropriate to say that the campaign was fully funded when our children still aren't getting the individualized dollars we fought so hard for. Our students seem to never get what they need. Parents, students, and education advocates have testified, demonstrated, and even walked to Albany to get this funded, and it's based on a model created 17 years ago. It's very disrespectful to the people that you serve. I asked this commission to make that make sense. I also asked the commission to question why things like ventilation systems, air conditioning, heat, and the conditions of our old school buildings aren't factored into the foundation aid formula when we know that depending on a child's environment, this can have a very negative effect on their learning. Ways should be added if a child is in foster care or unhoused. I was that foster child, and I can tell you I had no support for me, and that was 40 years ago. I will continue to advocate to support our students. This is a sound investment in our students' future. I sent in written testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Eric Byrne, and I'm the Superintendent of Schools for the Rye City School District. I'm also past president of the Lower Hudson Council of School Superintendents, which comprises 75 school districts in 4 BOCES in Dutchess, Putnam, Rockland, and Westchester counties. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. When the foundation aid formula was first enacted in 2007, it was an outstanding achievement. I'm hopeful that these hearings will lead to positive change for all students in New York. It is critical that school districts can rely on certain principles of funding. Funding must be adequate, equitable, predictable, flexible, clear, and must resolve the many unfunded and underfunded mandates that currently burden school districts. In considering the methodology for calculating foundation aid, a number of areas must be examined and/or adjusted in order to provide adequate funding to school districts. The Regional Cost Index. The Regional Cost Index has never been updated and assigns districts to a specific region that may not reflect the regional costs for that area. The Regional Cost Index must be appropriate for the actual costs encumbered by a school district. Special education costs. Meeting the needs of special education students requires an approach that reflects the range of costs associated with services. Funding to school districts must support the actual services delivered to the students. The Pupil Needs Index. The current model is flawed and must consider additional factors in the calculation of determining funding for students based on need. A more appropriate approach, which includes supporting English language learners, is necessary that incorporates the range of services and actual costs for services. The community wealth factor. The current model is flawed and does not actually consider the wealth or poverty of the actual students. Wealth in some portions of a school district can radically inform the calculation of the factor while not truly representing the wealth or poverty or needs of the community. Additionally, the tax cap negates any consideration of community wealth, as while the current model considers a community's ability to fund schools, the tax cap prevents, I'm just about done, prevents school districts from addressing needs without a supermajority of vote. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Lupe Hernandez, and I'm here speaking to you in my own personal capacity. As I do, I'm a parent leader, and I currently an advocate for some of our most vulnerable students in New York City public schools. I currently sit on the Citywide Council for Special Education and previously served on my district council as a Manhattan Borough president, where I chaired the Students with Disabilities Committee. I've also taken an active role in working alongside our regional directors of students in temporary housing and providing much needed supports for our housing insecure families as well as our newest neighbors. As I've seen firsthand how the current formula of the foundation aid is not meeting the legal constitutional right to a sound basic education for all of our students in New York, but especially disparaging for our students in New York City public schools. I see the lack of resources for our most vulnerable students, and transportation being one of them should really be considered when thinking about the amount of students that rely on school bus transportation and are not getting to school. The formula currently does not include pupil transportation, but this has prevented students with disabilities to even having an access to education. Public education is the cornerstone of our democracy, and it remains the best path to advancing equal opportunity at a time when deepening inequality. Public schools serve children of all abilities and identities, and to turn away anyone is just not adequate. And adequately funding our public schools to meet the diverse needs of our students is not just important, it is essential to ensuring their success and shared prosperity. Prioritizing our public education means investing in just and prosperous future for all New Yorkers. Every child in New York has a constitutional right to a basic sound education, and it is our government's responsibility to fund it. I would like for the foundation formula, it should be updated to reflect the real cost of educating students today so that every public school has the resources it needs to support all students. Any modifications to the formula must be made on the basis of how much it costs to ensure public schools are getting the resources to meet their students' needs. Underfunding public education is not sustainable and is not an option. And currently, the students with disabilities have the same weight regardless of their needs being met. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask folks to please stick to the 2 minutes. We have people that want to speak, and we want to make sure that everybody has time to speak. Could we have speakers 6 through 10 start to line up too? Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Alita McCoy. I am the Assistant Superintendent for Business, and I'm here with Mary Fox Alter, our Interim Superintendent, and Board of Education Trustee, Melissa Banta. We represent Ossining Union Free School District, a school district who has been key in helping the school districts get the funds that they should when we were not fully funded. We were part of the Harm Suburban 5, basically 5 school districts who were the least funded in the state for many, many years. We're fortunate to have been fully funded. However, the thought of changing some of the foundation aid formulas is wise, but we need to be making sure that we revamp the formula to ensure equity for our most vulnerable students and financial predictability for school districts. Some of the following factors in the foundation aid calculation should be reviewed. 1, utilize the small area income and poverty estimates, otherwise known as SAPE, to measure poverty of all students instead of using current measures for just measuring students in school districts. Number 2, the Community Eligibility Permission, also known as CEP. 89% of school districts are participating in this program. As a result, FERPL applications are not completed by families, and the FERPL 3-year average continues to decline, thereby reducing the foundation aid amount. A multiplier of the average FERPL should be considered. Number 3, CPI. The Consumer Price Index should not be adjusted, and or a minimum CPI should be established to increase the percentage. It was supposed to be 4.1%, and in this past year it was at 2.8%.
Thank you.
That was 20 seconds.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Andrea Ortiz, representing the Dignity in Schools New York, a coalition of students, parents, and advocates working to transform school safety and to end the school-to-prison pipeline. We want the state to fully fund foundation aid so our most marginalized students can access the programs they need to succeed academically, including restorative justice and mental health programs that keep them safe and engaged. Funding our public schools adequately is essential to ensure our shared prosperity and address our growing diversity. Over the last couple of years, 40,000 newly arrived temporary house students enrolled in New York City. And during the 2022-2023 school year, more than 1 in 5 New York City students had a disability. Roughly 148,000 students are English language learners. 8,000 of them were students with inconsistent interrupted formal education, also known as SIFE. 1 in 9 students experienced homelessness, and 6,800 students spent time in foster care. The state needs a foundation aid formula that addresses the growing needs of our public schools, including their social-emotional needs. Unfortunately, many New York State schools are extremely underfunded and cultivate punitive environments where students don't always feel safe. This trend is particularly harmful in schools serving Black, brown, and other marginalized young people who are targeted most harshly by school police. Underfunding our school communities creates barriers to learning and violates the safety and well-being of our students. Due to divestments, far too many students are consistently deprived of resources and opportunities and are met with policing responses instead of holistic programming and mental health supports. Therefore, we demand that New York State update the foundation aid formula to reflect the real cost of educating students today. Also, fully fund foundation aid so our schools can meaningfully invest in restorative justice and mental health in schools. Finally, all updates to the formula must cover the cost of providing a high-quality education to all students and should center BIPOC students, immigrant newcomers, students with disabilities, students in foster care, students in temporary housing, and LGBTQIA youth who need trauma-informed practices and quality programming to succeed. As a result, the formula should add weights for unhoused students, students in foster care, and other high-need categories not yet popularly captured, including SIFE students. Fully fund public schools to ensure all our youth can access the high-quality and holistic programming they need to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Randy Levine. I'm Policy Director at Advocates for Children of New York. For more than 50 years, Advocates for Children has worked to ensure a high-quality education for New York students who face barriers to academic success, focusing on students from low-income backgrounds. Every year, we help thousands of individual families navigate the New York City school system. And every day, we hear from parents who are having difficulty getting the support their children need in school, including families of students with disabilities, English language learners, students in temporary housing, and students in foster care. As you've heard today, New York City Public Schools' current budget is roughly 57% local funding and 37% state funding. There is a growing need for increased state support for city schools, particularly given the enrollment of 40,000 newly arrived immigrant students who are students in temporary housing, the expiration of federal COVID-19 relief funds that were being used for important long-term education programs, and the requirements of the class size law. As you consider changes to the foundation aid formula, we urge you to approach your recommendations through an equity lens. The formula must include the resources needed to provide a high-quality education to all students, including those who need the most support. Echoing the suggestions of others you've heard from today, our recommendations include providing funding through the formula specifically to support students in temporary housing and students in foster care, increasing the weights for students with disabilities and English language learners to better reflect program costs, including considering differentiation by program, updating the regional cost index to better reflect the growing costs of salaries and services, and ensuring the formula accounts for and funds the state's new class size requirements for New York City. Our written comments will provide more detail. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mary Fox Alter. I'm celebrating my 46th year as a New York State educator, yay New York, and my 14th year as superintendent of schools. I've held leadership roles in the region and at the state level. So I'm here to put a focus back on what foundation aid is about. It isn't just about the way the state funds or helps fund public schools. It's about the state's responsibility, constitutional responsibility to that. I have 3 technical pieces that I have, and then 1 fourth comment. First, fix the base costing out model. The Roosevelt Institute needs to explore other evidence-based approaches and adjust the regional cost index for Westchester County to reflect New York City and Long Island. Poverty. The formulas, current poverty weights are limited in how they measure, and they're limited in how they truly capture the real costs of poverty. The formula, 3, the formula needs to address the current real-time costs of educating our Ls and our students with disabilities or our differently enabled students. The weights are 0.65 and 0.50, and it doesn't even come close to addressing the current cost, and it doesn't come close to reflecting the changes in the Part 54 and the Part 200 regulations by New York State. Not even close. I think philosophically what the Roosevelt Institute can do and put a spotlight on is the fact that there are so many unintended consequences and underfunded and unfunded mandates in New York State. Statistically, the students with disabilities, Part 200, Part 154. My last recommendation is that the foundation aid formula needs to be adjusted for any unfunded or underfunded mandates that the state of New York passes on to local taxpayers. That formula should include those unfunded mandates.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we, before you start, can we have speakers 11 to 15 start to line up, please? And again, if we could keep it to 2 minutes, that would be great.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Banta from Ossining. I'm on the Board of Education in Ossining. I am also a lifelong resident and a historical firsthand witness to the inequities that our public education has passed down for far too long to our students. I'm also the mother of 3, so I've raised children as well in the school district, and I am privy to the evolution of the needs of the children in our district, and unfortunately the slow evolution of the financial support that those students need. I do want to add to my colleague, Ms. McCoy's captions that she gave around SAPE, CEP, CPI, also ELL for the English language learners. The weightings are weighted at 0.5 in Ossining. The number of ELLs has doubled in less than 5 years. And we also estimate that changing the weighting of the EL students from 0.5 to 1.0 would amount to approximately 2.6 million more in foundation aid. I would also like to add that our district has long been on the forefront of advocating for equity within our school district. And a lot of the work that we have done has been despite the lack of funding over the years, and simultaneously has been with our fight for that funding. I think the efforts that we bring forward in equity should also be matched in the financial support. The challenges that have come out of the pandemic alone, we have done our best to match those needs of students, but the funding, as we know, this outdated formula does not keep up with the needs, especially those needs that have emerged out of the pandemic. I think it's only right to make sure that we have a realistic financial lens when we support our children who are the most vulnerable people in our population.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Galiri Salas Ramirez, pronouns she, her, ella. I am a New York City public school parent of 2, one that is a child that has an IEP and the other one that is a rising kindergartner. I am also a neuroscientist, an associate professor at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, served 15 years as faculty at the CUNY School of Medicine. In addition, as a parent leader, I'm the former president of the Community Education Council for District 4 in East Harlem, and have spent the last 2.5 years on the panel for educational policy, which is the New York City School Board. I say all that to say that I have a lot to contribute to this conversation. However, what I do want to share is that in those 2.5 years, one of the first vote that we did not pass in our panel for educational policy was one on our fair student funding formula, because a lot of communities came to us and said, this formula is not fair. And so we engaged in a process that was transparent and was open with families, with educators, leaders, union leaders as well, to talk about the discrepancies that existed in our formula. We ended up creating 6 different recommendations, of which 2 were adopted, and these 2 were very critical for us. One was a weight to acknowledge poverty in our New York City public schools. In addition, a weight for students in temporary housing, which has been critical as we've received 40,000 newcomers in our city. We also spoke about the different weights for our students that have IEPs, as well as our English language learners. These are critical for investigating inequities that exist within our system. We understand that our commissioner is incredibly committed to bringing an equitable formula. With that, though, there has to be transparency as well as community engagement. So we hope that you come back with some modeling to show us how the differential weights can impact our communities, so that the community can provide you with feedback to what is adequate for our children, as they currently are not receiving what they need in our public schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the panel, my name is Ben Zebelman. I've had 2 children go through the Ossining Union Free School District. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the critical need for consistent and predictable foundation aid funding, in particular for the Ossining Union Free School District. Ossining's diverse community has faced more than a decade of funding challenges that must never be allowed to happen again. The current foundation aid formula has consistently failed districts like Ossining. Over the past 13 years, only the 2023-24 year was fully funded, my son's senior year. Cuts to essential programs, increased class sizes, and inadequate academic and social emotional supports are the result of more than a decade of chronic New York State foundation aid underfunding for Ossining. The Ossining School District is one of the most underfunded school districts over the past decade, receiving on average 50% of the foundation aid money due to it. Ossining's enrollment growth dating back to around 2010 significantly comprised of English language learners and low-income families, combined with underfunding, has caused great financial strain. Additionally, our growing community, perhaps fearful of participating in the census, has led to a significant undercounts in both 2010 and 2020. These factors, along with a reliance on community wealth indicators based off of New York State tax returns, also not accurate in a sizable and documented community, leave Ossining under-resourced. It is crucial to depoliticize foundation aid funding. My experience as a parent and community advocate meeting with elected officials in Albany over the years illuminated the unwillingness that some elected officials have with fixing foundation aid funding for school districts like Ossining. It is a house of cards, which as it falls causes inequities and harm. When foundation aid funding decisions are driven by politics rather than the actual needs of students, the children lose every time. Revise the formula to reflect students' needs, direct the money to the communities where the students are actually currently enrolled. A better foundation aid formula will ensure that all children in Ossining and New York State receive the fully funded education that the Constitution of New York guarantees. Thank you for your attention to this critical issue.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Deborah Stern, founder and executive director of Amani Public Charter School in Mount Vernon, New York. I am also a public school parent, having shepherded 3 children through the Pelham public school system, so I'm aware of education in the communities of the haves and the have-mores. The foundation aid formula established in 2007 is New York's only wealth equalizing formula. It levels the playing field by providing more funding to low-income, high-need districts from wealthier, lower needed areas. While the intent behind foundation aid is commendable, there's a significant disconnect in how it impacts charter schools that serve large percentages of the very students this aid aims to support. Charter students generate foundation aid revenue for their home districts, yet this isn't reflected in the funding our schools receive. This means that nearly 10% of New York's public school students, those in charter schools, aren't benefiting from the equitable funding principles foundation aid was designed to address. We must recognize that funding is a statement of priorities. The current system sends a troubling message about how we value students in charter schools. Are we saying that a high-need student in a public charter school is less deserving of resources than her counterparts in a district school? This can't be our intent, yet it's the reality of the current funding structure. We have an opportunity here to better serve all students by funneling additional resources to those with higher needs, regardless of the type of public school they attend. This includes updating the data used in the formula to reflect current demographic and needs. In closing, I urge you to consider how foundation aid can be adjusted to reflect the needs of all public school students, including those in charter schools. This could create a more equitable educational system and demonstrate that we truly prioritize the needs of every student in New York. Thank you very much. I give you back 5 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Carmen Romero Lee, and I teach 6th and 7th grade social studies at Yorkville East Middle School in Manhattan. The current funding formula for New York State schools simply is not meeting the needs of our students. We urge you to take action and advocate for New York State to revise its formula to allocate sufficient resources to ensure every child receives the proper support. Our school faces a critical shortage of resources to support our students' mental health and special education needs. We recently received news that budget cuts will eliminate one of our guidance counselor positions, leaving just one counselor and one social worker to support all of our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. This reduction comes at a particularly challenging time. Our middle schoolers, though no one wants to hear it, are still struggling with the social and emotional impacts of COVID. The pandemic's social isolation has led to challenges for many students, and our most vulnerable students need help reacclimating to the social environment of a classroom after remote learning. As educators, we're noticing issues with attention, classroom behavior, and social media dependence, contributing to a rise in anxiety, depression, and body image struggles among our students. We're seeing a need to address attention spans and classroom behavior that may have been impacted by excessive screen time. This is true even though at our school, students put their cell phones in locked yonder pouches during the school day. A discussion about how our school pays for that is for another day. We need that lost guidance counselor. Adding to these challenges, my school needs to receive the adequate resources we need to work with our special education students. Across grade levels, our special education teachers are overburdened and managing multiple subjects for the entire grade. Our principal has made the most of the budget she has been allocated and scrounged the funding necessary to hire another special education teacher, but the situation leaves limited time for the crucial one-on-one support these students require. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before the next speaker, can I get speakers 16 to 20 to start to line up? And thank you, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anna Wanang, and I'm a 2nd grade teacher at PSIS 78 in Long Island City, Queens. I'm here today because the current foundation aid formula does not adequately fund intervention services or services for special needs children. Not at my school and not at hundreds of other public schools across New York City. I have more than 700 students in my school in pre-K through 8th grade. We have no budget for intervention services. At one point, it was standard or expected to have staff dedicated to working with children who were struggling with reading or math in addition to the classroom teacher. At my school, we don't have the budget for intervention teachers. I will have 32 2nd graders in my classroom in the fall. My job and passion are to give each student what they need to achieve. But there is not enough time in the school day to do this in a class of 32. This is mind-boggling to me as an educator when the city just adopted science of reading curriculum, and the biggest push is for students to learn how to read. If the chancellor wants all students to read by adopting a new reading curriculum, it is important for teachers to get all the support and resources they need for this to be successful. Having an intervention reading teachers for all schools will help students who need extra support. In addition, how about fully funding a special ed teacher in an ICT classroom, even when you don't have the 60-40 ratio? How can a school receive a budget for half a teacher because an ICT class might not have a full 40% of special ed students? How is this fair to us most vulnerable students that need support from a full-time special ed teacher? And last, we only have one guidance counselor for the entire school. What happened to all the guidance counselors and social workers that the mayor promised us after COVID? Thus, we must fund schools to meet the needs of the children, not fund them based on an outdated formula. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Avi Gavilli, computer science and technology teacher at Intermediate School 7, located on the South Shore of Staten Island. I'm here today because the current foundation formula fails our students. We need a revamped system that funds schools based on our students' needs. That means covering the cost to meet state-mandated lower class size and providing equitable resources so teachers like myself don't have to fundraise or crowdsource to give our students what they deserve. Right now, I basically fund computer science classes by winning awards in STEM competitions. In 2024, my 7th grade students placed 3rd in a local Rotary competition by developing a new approach to mitigate air pollution. The $500 prize went towards replacing broken keyboards. Our school has an 8-year-old 3D printer, a dinosaur, in this environment of evolving technology. With adequate funding, I would invest in an online computer science curriculum to allow each student to progress at their own pace. With adequate funding, I would invest in additional current 3D printers because engineering today revolves around fabrication. Students love technology. It is a way to get them engaged, keep them engaged, and prepare them for college and careers. For my school as a whole, we are at capacity regarding space and staff, and so we'll struggle to reduce class sizes, something teachers have fought long and hard for, and which is now finally the law. I would invest in additional staff and space. My school just this year became eligible for Title I federal funds. That means our student population has changed, that our students now come from poorer households. We are investing in resources for the growing numbers of English language learners and recent immigrants, but it is not enough. We need to rethink how we fund schools. We need to fully fund our schools based on the needs of our students. They deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I begin?
Go ahead.
Hello. My name is Louis Wool. I've been the superintendent of schools in Harrison, New York for 23 years. So you can clap for that. I've been here long enough to know why you're here, and I'm very glad that you are. But how did you appear? You appeared because our governor was tone deaf to the conditions she was creating by proposing changes to this formula without any real understanding of the implications on kids. And so my message to you is, don't accept conditions that don't allow you to do the right work. I'm very confident that the people sitting up there have already identified many of the things that have been echoed over and over again. The most important thing for me is to spend the time to develop instruments that are actually responsive to everything you've heard here. I spent 18 years in the Mount Vernon City School District where almost all the children are of color and living in poverty. I've spent 23 years in a high resource district that doesn't actually reflect what you think it would. 25% of the kids that go to my high school are on free and reduced lunch. Your challenge is not to listen to the noise, but to come up with a better formula. I know that Michael Rebell was here earlier today, and I would say, I don't see you as adversaries. I see you as true allies working on something complex. Listen to the voices of the people who have been at this work and actually created the conditions to ask these questions. I know Michael is going to produce a study. I would suggest that you reach out to him. And one other name I'd put on your radar is Dr. Bill Johnson, who has spent a lifetime developing his expertise. He was a colleague giant in my field as a superintendent in Long Island at Rockville Center and has done great work for the state as a whole. But please, one competent recommendation from you could be, we need more time. Let's not do it wrong because somebody's given you an unrealistic expectation. And I thank you for listening with an open mind and heart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I am Sandy Wong, a kindergarten teacher in the Mott Haven section of the South Bronx District. This is my 24th year of teaching. I'm speaking on the urgent need to reform New York State Foundation aid formula. The formula is failing our most vulnerable students, particularly those in low-income communities where I teach. We should implement a sliding scale that allocates substantially more funds to school with higher percentages of students from low-income families, English language learners, and students with disabilities. We need a foundation aid formula that truly serves all our children regardless of their zip code and family income. At my school, PS 30, I have many students living in shelters or in uncertain housing situations doubled up with extended families. We used to have 2 full-time social workers, coordinators in my school building assigned to work with students living in temporary housing. One left and was not replaced to provide trauma-informed counseling, parent outreach, crisis support, home visits, etc. The current formula treats all students equally, but here's the truth. All New York City students don't start on equal footing. In the Bronx, we're not just teaching math and reading. We're battling poverty, hunger, and trauma. Our students are coming to school without breakfast, hungry, worried about where they'll sleep at night. Some are learning English for the first time. Others are navigating learning disabilities. And yet our funding doesn't reflect these enormous challenges. Every child deserves a chance for a fair and equitable funding formula, especially vulnerable students, particularly those in low-income families and communities. We need a form that recognizes the actual needs of our students and understand that equity in funding doesn't mean equity in education. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just want to remind folks before we go on, the Rockefeller Institute is happy to take written testimony. And so if you've prepared something to say tonight and you feel like you didn't get through it, please submit it as written testimony. Everything will be read and weighed equally. So just want to remind folks that that's also available. Thank you. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Kulsum Tapal. I'm the Education Policy Coordinator at the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. CACF is the nation's only pan-Asian advocacy organization advocating for the equity of Asian American and Pacific Islanders. We are submitting testimony with over 40 signatories within the AAPI community today to express our deep concerns about the current foundation aid formula and how in its current form, New York public schools continue to be underfunded, violating the constitutional right for all students to have access to sound basic education. The outdated SSD model used in the calculation of base cost results in inadequate funding for the necessary programs and resources to support AAPI students and all students. Updating the base cost calculations is a necessary first step. NYSED should adopt an alternative poverty measurements to accurately count students needing additional services and determine the associated costs. There is a need to restructure the equation to account for resources like instructional supports, mental health staff, language access support, etc. Reliance on outdated measures like free and reduced lunch lunch counts and 2000-year census data underfunds low-income schools, especially in rapidly changing communities, which include many AAPI neighborhoods. Poverty measurements should expand to include various factors like Medicaid enrollment when determining costs to support students experiencing need. The formula should also support the education of English and multilingual learners. The formula's current failure to consider the diverse needs of ELL and MLL students, including those with varying levels of English proficiency and those with interrupted formal education, results in significant underfunding for essential resources like bilingual education programs, bilingual educators, and translation services, straining school district budgets. Students with disabilities also lack necessary resources due to an inadequate evaluation of support costs. The current formula has created a situation where districts are pushed to over or underclassify students based on funding allocation. The formula should consider varying needs and allocate funds appropriately, which is especially relevant for AAPI students with disabilities who are often overlooked, underdiagnosed, and underserved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Troy McGee, and I'm a special education teacher and a dean at Curtis High School on Staten Island. As we all know, parents and educators fought for decades to get lower class sizes for New York City students, something they already enjoy in other parts of the state. Because of that work, we now have a law requiring smaller class sizes, but we do not have the funding needed to hire staff. Smaller class sizes give us more one-on-one time with our students, something that our students desperately need. And at Curtis, we have over 2,400 students, but we only have 1 social worker, 2 school psychologists. We are lucky enough to have a health center that affords us another social worker, but it's not enough. As a dean, I get pulled into every crisis and emergency. Too many times I've seen students leave our building in an ambulance heading to the psych ER because of suicidal ideations. Our school also receives many migrant students. We lack the bilingual teachers needed to give them instruction in their native language during the course of the day. So we have to resort to Google Translate, or we sit the new students with students that speak their native language. We are teaching in a post-COVID world, but we are being funded with a pre-COVID formula. That's not good enough. I can do better for our students, you can do better for our students, and we together can do much better for our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Terrain Reeves, an educator of 25 years, currently teaching at Edward R. Murrow High School, a 3,600 student high school in Midwood, Brooklyn. The current Foundation Aid formula was created in 2007, and it is broken. Over the past 17 years, while funding has been provided to our schools, it has not kept up with the needs of our students, which have evolved and grown exponentially, especially since the pandemic began. It has not provided adequate funding for our neediest children who are homeless, children who require special education services, or children who have experienced trauma. My school has 3 full-time social workers, 1 full-time psychologist, 2 part-time psychologists for 3,600 students. We have part-time OT-PT providers and part-time mental health counseling providers for our neediest students. The city provides funding for 225 children in temporary housing at our school. However, our number is more than 400 students in temporary housing. Many are not included in the city's budgeting for our school. During my first year in college, I was homeless. I experienced abuse and trauma at the hands of my mother while in high school. It was my counselor who took money from her pocket to provide me with food and clothing while giving me counseling at school. Years later, my colleagues and I are doing the same thing many of our educators and support staff did for us when we were in school, providing supplies due to the lack of funding from the city and the state. Nothing has changed. We should be ashamed. Public schools should serve children of all abilities and identities. We must adequately and equitably fund our public schools to meet the needs of our students. We need to ensure the success and shared prosperity of every student in our classrooms. We must prioritize public education and invest in a just and prosperous future for all New Yorkers.
Thank you.
We cannot continue with this Band-Aid approach. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I have speakers 21 to 25 also join now?
Ready? I am legislator Erica Pierce, the representative for Westchester County's 2nd District. I represent 4 school districts, and I can tell you the Foundation Aid formula does not work equally for my 4 schools. I'm here to talk about one of those districts, the Bedford Central School District, today. BCSD serves 3,600 students living in 3 towns. Each of these towns are so distinct that one has an elementary school where 78% of the students are Hispanic and 69% are economically disadvantaged, while another town has a small number of residents with outsized fame and wealth. Out of 46 districts in Westchester and Putnam counties, BCSD is number 11 in free and reduced lunch, number 6 in percentage of, and number 4 in growth of ELL learners. For our ELL students, who make up 41% of the district's population, 84% are in poverty, and 26% have disability. And with all that, BCSD is number 38, or 8 from the bottom, in total state aid per student. Here are some of the many ways the formula is failing our kids. Regional cost groupings. Westchester County should be grouped with similar communities, such as Nassau County, when calculating costs. By having our expenses undercounted, our kids lose. Measures of district wealth. Using mean versus median income alone makes a huge difference. A switch from mean to medium moves BCSD from being in the top 5 wealthiest districts in Westchester to being just shy of the bottom quarter. Again, our kids lose. Census data. Using 24-year-old data to calculate student poverty means missing significant and ongoing demographic shifts in our community's population, as you probably heard from everybody up here today. By not capturing our current community population, again, our kids lose. The foundation aid formula needs a meaningful update, and the timing is critical. Our districts are facing strong budgetary headwinds and are outpacing the tax cap limitations, which is making it very difficult to serve our communities. Combine that with the steep rise in our population of high-need at-risk students, and the situation becomes dire. And a footnote, which applies to most of my districts, we will be facing unprecedented capital needs as areas without municipal water due to PFAS exceedances. We need help with that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start with number 50, and 50 to 54, if you would start lining up, that would be great. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. My name is Paulette Healy, and I'm a parent raising 2 children with disabilities in Brooklyn. One attending a District 75 program, which is a program that services students with developmental or multiple disabilities. I'm also a D75 community advocate and support hundreds of families during their IEP process. I'm here to advocate for my community in the re-examination of the Foundation Aid formula. I'm also a recent graduate of the Ed Warriors program from the Alliance for Quality Education, which has spearheaded this entire initiative for a campaign for fiscal equity and resulted in you being here today. Public education remains our best path to advancing equal opportunity at a time when people with disabilities are invisible in the eyes of our society. Adequately and equitably funding our public schools to meet the diverse needs of students is not just important, it's essential to ensuring their success and normalizing the need for accommodations instead of stigmatizing it. Prioritizing public education means investing in a sustainable future. Presently, all students with disabilities are weighted exactly the same within the Foundation Aid formula. A lot of my colleagues have already said that. What that means is a child that needs a speech therapist is funded exactly the same way as a child who needs speech, OT, PT, counseling, and a one-on-one para. The impact of that funding approach is that schools struggle to hire the necessary staff required to serve our population with fidelity. It results in massive caseloads for existing related service providers, resulting in massive burnout and staff turnover. And that leads to long-term vacancies in positions within special education, and our students experience delays in assessments and gaps in service when time is not a resource any of our children can afford to lose. Our families should not have to fight to have their children's services met simply because of a flawed funding formula. The formula should be updated to reflect the real cost of educating students today, including but not limited to after-school programs, literacy coaches, bilingual service providers, so that all students can have access. School nurses, such a fundamental right, and yet we are not funded properly for them. Any modifications to the formula must be made on the basis of how much it costs to ensure public schools are getting their resources met and that their students' needs and prioritize students with disabilities, students in temporary housing, and students in poverty. We have proven special education programs that the community needs to fight for every year, and we shouldn't have to. These are baseline needs. We should not have to continually go to court to get our kids the appropriate resources and related services.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is John Mermelstein. I'm a teacher in West Harlem. Thank you all so much for being here, taking notes, and listening to our stories. I think the big picture, what I'm getting from what I've heard and from my experience, is that educators are being asked to do more and more, but with less and less. Whether that's the influx of English language learners as a result of the migration crisis, whether it's students with disabilities, whether it's students in transient housing, hunger, and I'm so glad one of the other folks here mentioned how hungry our students are every single day. A lot of them don't arrive to school on time when breakfast is served, so they're hungry all day. This is creating a climate where teachers are on the brink, and I'm here to tell you that if cuts are made on any large scale, we're going to see the crisis of teachers leaving the profession only exacerbated, because we're hanging on by a thread right now in the aftermath of COVID and just with everything happening in our school system. that we really could not deal with another round of cuts. Another thing I'd like to talk about is how promises have been made, but continually not kept to New York City students and educators. Whether it's the school class thing that we fought for years for, whether it's the campaign for fiscal equity, where it took over a decade to actually have this foundation funding fully funded in the first place, whether it's nurses, as the person before me just mentioned. At my previous school, we had a nurse every other day. So if something happened on one of those days, you were just out of luck. But the contrasting picture I'd like to paint, though, is what our school system can be if we do, statewide, if we do fund our districts. We can look at numerous suburban districts, numerous schools in New York City that do really succeed in meeting students' needs, creating a climate where folks can thrive emotionally and academically. We have programs like Aspira, America's Scores, Brosis, and again in West Harlem, that do what we want education to do. We just need to provide the funding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Brown from upstate New York, Syracuse area. I'm here representing a charter school, Truxton Academy. I'm a board member and volunteer, and I don't want to go through I prepared a written speech. I'll submit it, but you've heard everything tonight. But I did want to highlight what I heard someone else say tonight. Charter schools are not included in the foundation aid funding formula. And this is an opportune time to hit that disparity. I think you all know we take kids with in general, we take kids with higher needs, higher special needs, whether it be ALL, behavior issues, income inequality. We take them at higher rates. And I think in general, we're pretty creative and make those resources work a little bit more creative and produce results with that. So I'm hoping you'll take a look at that in your complex task you have ahead of you, and I really appreciate you letting me come down and speak for a few minutes. So I yield back your time.
Thank you very much.
Hey, y'all. My name is Vincent Corletta, and I am the proud ELA teacher in District 27 at MS 137 South Ozone Park, Queens. I'm here today because the current foundation formula fails my school in 3 critical ways. 1, it does not provide enough for students in temporary housing. 2, it does not provide enough to lower class sizes. 3, it does not provide enough to address the mental health needs of our students. Students in temporary housing, including our new New Yorkers, have gone through traumatic experiences just getting to New York City. I've heard some of those stories, but they are not mine to share. These children need help not only in English instruction, but in navigating a new country, new places with different customs. There is an intense amount of pressure on these students as they are often the translators for their parents and guardians. Myself and other educators do as much as we can when we can, but it shouldn't be left to individual educators only. Now is the time to fix these flaws with foundation aid. If we had smaller class sizes, I could develop deeper connections with my students, provide deeper learning experiences, but once again, the foundation formula does not provide. So not only do I have students with major needs like staying in temporary housing and learning a new language, I cannot have a class that is set to 23 students. And with the major influx of the new New Yorkers, these class sizes can balloon quickly and overnight. The current foundation aid formula is not enough to meet the new class size law requirements, not in terms of staff or space. Now is the time to fix these flaws with foundation aid. Finally, the current foundation aid formula is not enough to address the mental health needs of all students. We have nearly 2,000 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. We have only 3 guidance counselors, 1 per grade level. So each is responsible for more than 800 students. We have 2 social workers. Do the math. My school and my administration do the best they can with what they have, yet anytime there's a crisis or the ever-growing issue of suicidal ideation, that's it. There's a scramble. That person is not there in their office for those kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Marilyn Mendoza, and I am here today both as a concerned parent and an education justice organizer for Make the Road New York. For the past 6 years, I've been advocating tirelessly for our public schools, but now I am speaking not just as an organizer, but as a parent facing the stark realities of our education system. As my 3-year-old prepares to enter school this year, my heart is heavy with concern. I've spoken with countless parents who share heartbreaking stories of underfunded schools lacking essential programs, after-school activities, summer school, adequate staffing, and even basic necessities like nurses are absent in too many of our schools. Classrooms are overcrowded and children with individualized education programs, IEPs, are not receiving the crucial services they require. Personally, the challenges hit closer to home. Due to a severe shortage of special education classes in my neighborhood, my child has been placed in a school an hour away from our home. This separation is not only inconvenient, but fundamentally unfair to both my child and our family. Every child has a constitutional right to a sound basic education. It is the duty of our government to ensure that this right is upheld across the state, without exceptions or disparities based on zip code or neighborhood demographics. The current foundation aid formula is failing our children. It does not reflect the true cost of providing quality education nor adequately account for the diverse needs of our students. We urgently need an updated formula that allocates resources based on what it truly costs to ensure that every public school has the resources necessary to meet the needs of its students. Today, I urge this committee to take action. Our children cannot wait any longer. They deserve equitable access to education regardless of where they live or their individual challenges. Let's work together to reform the foundation aid formula so that it aligns with the principles of fairness, equity, and justice that we all hold dear. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who has signed up to speak that I have not called up? If there is anyone that would like to speak, you can go sign up and we will hold the mic open for a bit so that if people, oh, right there, go like this so everybody can see you. Like I said, we will hold the mics open, but thank you to the folks who came tonight and who participated. We truly appreciate your time and attention to this very important work.